the audience intends.
Okay. If anyone's here intends to speak, would you be willing to wait? Is anyone here not willing to wait? Let's put it that way. For a couple celebrations we want to have, and then to have the students play their music. You're not willing to wait? Yeah, we would not do that. Yeah. But there was one person who was not willing to wait. Well, I'm asking. How long? I don't know, probably about a half an hour. So if you want to make a comment now, you can feel free, and anyone who's willing to wait about a half an hour will come back to comments for the hearing. Okay, great. Okay, so the first thing, we've got some great musicians. Before you guys come on stage, we've got two people we want to celebrate. And we will start with a celebration of tenure.
Excuse me, Doug, we just need to open the public portion of the meeting.
Right, okay. Opening up Hastings-on-Hudson Board of Ed meeting, December 16th, 2019. Okay, so we want to celebrate the tenure of Terry Frank from the middle school, and I will pass the meeting over to Valerie, Dr. Henning Piedmont now, so we can start the celebration.
And I'd like to call Ms. Kipper and Mr. Keogh to the podium along with Ms. Frank. You get to come up to the podium. Okay, so you know what? If you would come up and have a seat, we'll actually start with someone else, so you'll already be up here, and thank you. Would you give her a hand? She's getting tenure.
Okay, so we will come back in hopefully 10 or 15 minutes, or 10 minutes. The second celebration is we want to acknowledge someone probably many of you know, Jeannie Newman. And want to acknowledge her for what is now 30 years, as some of you may know, of Project Share, which has been a tremendous program. Actually dates before that a couple years, I know, during the Midnight Run, for the wonderful commitment she has to society in general, our school district, the people in our, having been a teacher here, the people in our community, and the wonderful people you've served over the years. So Project Share is an opportunity to bring in less fortunate people from, is it Westchester, New York? Okay. You can say it much better than I can, so I'll let you go to the microphone. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about the past 30 years?
First of all, thank you so very much. Am I not talking?
Let's make sure that's on.
I've been binge watching Mrs. Maisel, so be careful. I might take it and walk around the room with it. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, all right. Okay. First of all, thank you to the Board of Education and to the administrators and to the parents and the community and the kids. That's what this is all about, actually. And Project Share is 32 years old in existence, and it started as a result of the very quick growth of homeless in New York City. It was started by Reverend Joe Gilmore up at South Presbyterian Church in Dobbs Ferry, and when we, Hastings High School, through Project Share, that was an invention on my porch one summer, when we joined, the Midnight Run as a consortium was 11 groups strong. We were one of them. It is now 250 plus groups. And so the relationships that the kids and I made with the homeless street people back in 1988 and the end of 87 and 88, inspired us to do something much greater than just outreach. And we thought, wouldn't this be this fabulous idea if we could have a Thanksgiving dinner? And so I approached my principal, Dr. Tom Fazio, and he said, great idea, run with it. You know, raise the money and come up with the stuff, and I will back you. Bless you, Tom. And so in 1989, we had our very first Thanksgiving dinner for the homeless, and it was 125 men from the street. And it was strictly Manhattan, and the kids and the adults and the teachers, Josh Blum was one of them, who sat down with us. We all broke bread together, and it was truly a dinner of Thanksgiving. And the dinner grew exponentially every single year, and it got to a point where we would wink and people would say, so how many guests are you anticipating this year? And we'd go, oh, the amount that it says on the little plaque in the cafeteria, we won't have any more than that maximum, which of course, I shouldn't even admit to, we probably had one or two more than the 325. At any rate, our 25th anniversary was our largest dinner with 859 men, women, and children from all 5 boroughs and Westchester County. So that answers your question. Our guests for the last, 30 years? So for the last 15 years have come from all 5 boroughs and Westchester County. And we invite no longer just the guys that we met on the street, but we have gone into family shelters, and we invite people who we know are marginalized, because that's been our focus. Our focus is not listening to the people who said, why are you doing this? It was always answering by saying, why are we not all doing this? Why are we not teaching kindness? It's just being kind. It really is. And for me and these kids, this is half of my board, so I'm pointing to them. But for these kids, to watch them interact with folks on the street is the most extraordinary gift a former teacher could ever have, and that's the truth. This past Saturday, we did a midnight run, and we had one of our guys, his name is Larry. Larry was at one of our stops, and this is a guy that probably no one has ever listened to, that nobody's ever paid attention to. He gathered the kids and he said, I'm gonna sing for you. And he sang, and I'm a photographer, but I don't take pictures of my homeless street friends, and I don't identify them by name, last name, or location. But here were these kids listening to Larry sing to them, and it was mesmerizing. It was mesmerizing to watch the kids give him the respect and the kindness that he was due. So, these are the things that Project Share, this is only one of the many things that we do that I think is the essence of the experiences that the kids who do this, the adults that do this, walk away with. I'm very, very lucky. I say it all the time. I grew up in this community. I graduated from Hastings High School in 1969. Do the math. I just had my 50th high school reunion, so I taught here for 23 years. I sat on the youth council. I feel this incredible obligation to give back to a community that raised me, to give back to parents, my parents, who gave me the tools to do this. They taught me to be kind. It's my responsibility to pass that on. Don't kid yourself. Your children learn everything from you, everything. And if you can teach them one thing, teach them kindness, because it is extraordinary how far that goes. I promised Doug that I would tell you some amazing statistics, and this is taken from very careful calculations and on my part. Not only, now this is up to date as of last Saturday, not only have our students prepped and served 20,380 pounds of turkey at our 30 dinners, but they have also passed out 96,300 bagged lunches, 25,500 cups of coffee, 4,332 hot dogs on our annual June hot dog run, 20,132 cups of soup, or Rob, the chili man, his chili, and all out of the goodness and the kindness of their heart. That's what the essence of Project Share is. The history, does it matter? Okay, fine. It was an expression of desire to help those who really need it. And we grew from there. We learned what it was to be in the marginalized segment of our culture. Why not share that and show that to my students, was what I kept saying. And that was 32 years ago. Somebody said to me recently, are you gonna do it again? Like, are you gonna do the dinner again? You know, how do you top a mariachi band? You know, you ask them back is how you top it, you know? And yes, of course we're gonna do it again, and we will do it because we can. And we will do it until we no longer cannot. And that's the entire thing. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your graciousness. Thank you for supporting Project Share, these amazing kids. My absolutely phenomenal husband and I thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and I mean that. Thanks.
Before Ms. Newman leaves, I'd like to read a plaque that we're giving as a small token of our appreciation on behalf of the Board of Education. So if I could just read this so that people, please don't be embarrassed. You deserve so much more. Jeannie Newman, founder and executive director, Share the Project Incorporated, in recognition of 30 years of devotion and care for others as an educator, advocate, leader, role model, social activist, and friend. Presented by the Hastings-on-Hudson Union Free School District Board of Education and Superintendent of Schools on this date, December 16, 2019.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Okay, so Gail.
Mrs. Frank, yeah. You'll go over near the podium with Ms. Kipper and Mr. Keogh.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure to be here this evening to speak on behalf of Terry Frank. Ms. Frank is joined here this evening her son Jacob. Where are you, Jacob? Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. Welcome. Can you hear? It's good? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. But Jacob is here, and also Miss Frank's entire support team is here. Miss Bellis, thank you for being here. Dr. Tesler, Miss Perez, it's a pleasure to have you here to support Terry this evening. Miss Frank joined our team in 2015 as a part-time social worker. Once the position became full-time, we were lucky it enabled us to offer Miss Frank's expertise to more of our students. Miss Frank has more than 21 years of experience, and as our school social worker, Miss Frank's close collaboration with students, parents, and outside agencies deeply benefit our families and enhance our children's ability to access education. As a member of our student support team, Ms. Frank's deep knowledge of social work theory and technique helped to focus our discussions on how best to support our students. Her knowledge permits her to provide meaningful psychoeducation to families focused on child development, boundaries, appropriate parenting, and the value and importance of school attendance. Her expertise regarding developmentally appropriate behavior, behavior management, and the creation of behavior plans is well regarded among her colleagues. Ms. Frank's clear understanding of the developmental characteristics of childhood, preteens, and teens is evidenced in our SST meetings, parent meetings, and faculty meetings. Also, Ms. Frank actively attends conferences to incorporate and turnkey best practices, as in Ruler or CBT in schools, mindfulness training. She is committed to lifelong learning and professional growth. She is an active member of the National Association of Social Workers. Ms. Frank's role as Positive Behavior Intervention and Support Coordinator, PBIS, which was a mouthful, has helped the program to thrive. Under her leadership, the program has expanded to include a well-articulated reward program, PBIS Gear, faculty-sponsored Bake and Take, which is a big hit in the middle school, and Bakerspace, an activity that merges cooking lessons from home and careers and engineering lessons from technology education. Additionally, Ms. Frank has initiated and instituted a 6th grade service club, the first of its kind in the middle school, whose purpose is to empower young people as advocates for social justice. Ms. Frank has taken student activists to the Lenore Preserve, where they have learned about the environment, their carbon footprint, and how each student can make a positive change. Meanwhile, at Midnight Run, students created toiletry packets for distribution, and at Cornell Academy, students read books to an underserved population. Within our community, Ms. Frank is a leader in the Hastings Way Coalition, where, as a board member, she helps study and respond to incidents of student substance abuse. She serves as a school representative on our district diversity committee, building leadership team, and has volunteered for our multicultural book fair. Students can also speak to her work as a second-step lesson leader in their classrooms. Within our larger community, Ms. Frank organized a team of faculty members and student volunteers and created a special faculty versus student basketball fundraiser game. She attends plays, concerts, special education coffees, Family University, and to community coalition events. She also participates at SEPTA coffees. She works with parents to advocate for the needs of students with IEPs. She's also been invited to speak with our PTSA at PTSA family meetings. Ms. Frank is skilled at setting goals. We're so fortunate that her reflective skills allow her to effectively reassess and self-evaluate her own efforts. Ms. Frank exemplifies integrity, confidentiality, and professionalism. She is considered, without question, a leader among her colleagues. Ms. Frank is tireless in her advocacy for children and their families, securing resources both in and out of school. Our school community is better because of her. It's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Frank.
Without the four of you, I would definitely not be able to do all that I do. Thank you to the Board of Ed, thank you to our new superintendent, and most of all, thank you to the families, the students that make me want to come to work every day.
Thank you. So to make this official, the board will need to take an official vote now. So do I have a motion to approve tenure for Terry Frank?
So moved.
A second? Second. All in favor? Congratulations. Okay, so we're going to just take 10 minutes. We've got to celebrate both Terry and Jeannie. We've got cake for probably 7 to 10 minutes, and that'll give time for the children to come up on stage. And so we'll start in about 10 minutes, Mike, okay? Great.
Starting at 10 minutes?
Well, bring them up, and then we'll start.
Well, they come up in droves.
Oh, okay. Whoever's first then.
Let's
yeah. We will take about a 7-minute. I will time it to keep stuff moving here.
Stay tuned, but it is a wonderful way to start it off. Dave Franco is going to play America the Beautiful.
I promise we're not confused about how to pronounce the word W-I-N-D. We're fitting the Shakespearean rhyme scheme, and so it might sound a little bit different than you'd expect.
Ariella Eliassi, Jingle Bell Rock. So, stand up, Ariella. Oh, you are standing. Oh. That's a fourth grader at Hillside, just letting you know.
Preparing me for my job as a sandwich guy.
Are you going one side and the other? What are we doing?
I don't know.
Excuse me. Where do you want to
Where do you want?
Anywhere where they can see if you want to push these chairs in,
I'm gonna
or on the
go
other
around.
side of the table.
Yeah, I think that's going to be better.
Okay, Adelaide.
American Noel. So we are singing in Congolese.
No, this must go out that way.
This is not working. Yeah, I see it right. Over a small crowd,
You ready? This is the Hillside Band, the brass section of the Hillside Band with one saxophone. And we're going to play Jingle Bells. Here we go. What position? 1, 2, 3. Mazel tov. 1, 2, 3, and... Only another hour and a half. And... play Up on a Housetop. Instrumental group is here to play Waltz of the Flowers for you to end our portion of the board meeting. So here they are. Thanks. Thank you guys very much for coming out and playing for us. I really appreciate it. And thanks to my colleagues, John Carini, John Riss, Katie Cochran, and thanks to the Board of Education and to Valerie for inviting us to play tonight. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Mike Rubino, thank you very much for your leadership. Thank you. Great concert. And the kids. Okay, we want to open up, leave off before we started the music and the celebration, and open up the floor to public comments on the hearing for which Ms. Janauer just read a little bit ago the, what's the word I'm looking for? Referendums? So if everyone who wants to speak, please come up to the microphone so we can hear you. Please state your, if you're a resident of Hastings, and you'll have 3 minutes each to speak.
How are you? My name's Nancy Sassano, 21 Ronnie Circle. That was a beautiful concert, and I hate to be a Debbie Downer after that. I really feel bad about this.
Can you just pull the microphone a little bit closer to your mouth?
We appreciate you listening to our concerns about the expansion of Hillside, and what we're confused about is the first bond presentation last January. Doug had said something about you compromised with the constituents, that, you know, people were complaining that it was too high and some too low. So you compromised and you got to the 18.3 million. And when we asked about the reserves, if you had an emergency and you had to use the reserves, the answer to that was they didn't want to, because we would have to have a tax added on to our property tax the following year. We would go into the operational budget if you used all the reserves. So I hope you understand our concerns, because moving the reserves over and not having anything for emergencies is our concern for the following tax year. Okay? Thank you. Appreciate your time. Beautiful concert.
Thank you. Just want to note, you can go up, but we do have the architect, Ray Dovell, is going to be here presenting some more detailed, annotated versions of the drawings. They were just put up on board docs about an hour ago, so you can view those after the meeting if you've not seen those. He'll be here later. Oh, he's here now. Okay.
Hi. The name is Zamir Yosepovich, 20 Mendham Avenue. First, I have to tell you, it is equally outrageous as it is pathetic to start a meeting scheduled for 7:15 at 8:30 due to apparently the board inviting the delay. I think this was highly, highly inappropriate, especially for some of us that came here specifically to address the issue at hand. So if this was pre-planned, or if this is just yet another indication of how this board operates, it does not speak well for you.
One of the reasons, just to clarify, was just because the December 2nd meeting was canceled, and so we struggled to get everything on the agenda. Please.
But it would have been nice to have heads up. This entire discussion about reserve funds and repair funds and moving money around and the way this is being done reminded me, really, somebody who's lived in the city for many years, of what I used to see in Times Square, which is the 3 Monty games. It really does feel like now you have it, now you don't, here it is, here it isn't. There's $200,000 in a repair fund. It's not a repair, we're gonna move it to another place, and we're gonna completely deplete the repair fund. But don't worry about tax implications. We're now going to have 1.3 million in a capital fund. We're going to take that money and deplete it. But we're going to get some back, but don't worry, there won't be any effect on our bond ratings. The voters approved a particular bond. I have no problem saying that. I have never, ever since I've lived in Hastings for 12 years, voted down a bond, a budget, nothing. I still have skin in this game. I still have a child in school. But the voters approved a bond. We are now told, and this is from your own words, that in a perfect world, I wish we had the ability to get more information before passing the bond. These are your words in this last week's enterprise. So you are now passing bonds to which you have apparently, according to you, no information. How can you be trusted now to tell us that there's not going to be tax implications and there's not going to be bond rating implications? Just disregard what the voters voted for. When you do have a design that meets the bond that was passed, and you just decided, nah, we'd rather go higher. Two words come to mind here: credibility and accountability. You called a meeting this evening for 7:15, starts at 8:30. No accountability, no credibility. You now want to pass and spend $2 million plus more dollars. Where's the accountability? Where's the credibility? In three-card money games, the players, here the taxpayers, always lose. Please don't play us.
Hello, my name is Kathy Sullivan. I live at 17 Wilson Place. I'm here from a couple different perspectives. I'd like to share them with you. First, I'm a parent. My children went through Hillside and Farragut in the high school. I'm a person who's concerned about environmental impacts of decisions that are made. I'm a community member. I was on one of the school board's facility groups for the previous bond, and I've been on the planning board for our community for a number of years. I'm an architect, and I'm also an architect with a special, I think, perspective. I've worked for a variety of nonprofit and also for the federal government, being an in-house manager of capital funds, so I'm familiar with sort of some of the decision-making that needs to go on. One of the things I've learned over time is that it's important as you go through a process where you develop a design that you remember the goals that you had. In the beginning, it always go back and say, are we meeting those goals or are we deviating from those goals? So this is kind of a point to check in. And I think there are a couple of things that the community should get, which is some information about how the program has changed, which has been one of the things that has started to trigger the increase in the square footage, which is one of the major reasons for the increase in the costs and the reasons that why you're going to be asking for different ways of using funds and the reason that the project has increased. There are also some consequences, I think, of the decisions that were made for reorienting the building and also changing the roof. I think someone also in the enterprise mentioned that the program is, been as narrowly as tweaked, it can go no further. Well, all programs can be tweaked and changed. It depends on the goals and the reasons that you've decided to make those decisions. I think the decisions that you made, and I'm going to speak as an architect and then as a parent, in reorienting the building and changing the roof configuration, the roof orientation, have had some things that have some detrimental consequences. One of the reasons, as I read that in your SECRA application, is that you are now needing to go for a federal wetlands permit, or made that decision. That was an impact that potentially that's a negative consequence of what you've done. The other thing that I feel as a parent, and I should say, with the roof orientation, you've taken away the opportunity for solar panels to be on Hillside, which was part of the bond presentation that you had. That's, I think, a detrimental consequence of that choice. I want to speak a little bit about the character of the cafeteria and the meeting space that you've created. The choice of using these, I'll call them bleachers, they make me think of what's here at the gym, as sort of seating for first graders and kindergartners seems to be an inappropriate type of seating for kids that small. I mean, one of the renderings that the architect had showed sort of something that looks, I would be frightened as an adult to be at the top level of that type of thing. The last thing, and I guess that's a sign that I should stop, is that the roof itself, the images that were part of the architect's presentation are from an adult's perspective. They're beautiful pictures of concert halls with a very undulating ceilings and all that kind of thing. But is that really what children in a cafeteria need to experience? I mean, it's sort of like a lot of grand gestures that potentially are costly, but I think create a character that may not be appropriate for the kids. Because of just wanting to feel a little bit more sheltered, a little bit more in a quieter type of environment. And the last thing is that because of the way that the plan's been developed, the beautiful windows that were going to look to the south out to Hillside themselves now have the seating in it. And that to me, I think, is just a way of, there's a lot of trending of thoughts that it's very good to have connection to the outdoors when you're inside. And I think that's just a lost opportunity. So thank you for your time, and thank you very much for all your efforts in helping serve the community. It's appreciated.
I'm not. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me? I'm Lisa Eggert-Litvin, and I live in Hastings. I may be a little bit sporadic because I'm going to try not to repeat what everyone else has said. And then at the end, I want to read a letter that was submitted to the board last week. I want to start by thanking our architect, Ray DeVell. Ray did a great job. And I'm hearing him be criticized for cost issues. To be clear, Ray presented two designs. One smaller, one bigger. The smaller design, my understanding is it comes in at the cost of the bond, or pretty darn close. The larger one is the one that triggers over $2 million in cost. So again, thank you to Ray for the two designs. I've been watching you guys discuss on the video, and I will say I may have missed things because the sound quality isn't great, but I've been troubled by the framework, or perhaps lack of framework that I've heard in the discussion. So I've heard you all discuss, do we want these additions, do we not? But there's a greater context. And what I haven't heard is, what will this do to the district's financial status? That's something Zamir talked about. That has to be considered. It must be. And what I also did not hear anybody mention is what other projects are coming down the pike. 20 of us wrote to our business officials saying, can we have the 5-year capital plan? I don't even know if you guys have seen it or had seen it when you made the decision to go forward. And I would say, you are fiduciaries. You must ask these questions. How can you make a decision to go forward with a $2 million plan without knowing what lies ahead? And then when we got the document, the 5-year plan that says work that must be done in the next 5 years. And we're talking serious work. Door replacement, which was so urgent last year that we pulled it out of the bond because it was a safety issue. Window replacement, asbestos removal, bringing our toilet rooms into ADA compliance. We talk about being an inclusive school, but we are not inclusive when it comes to our children with physical disabilities if they cannot use the same washrooms as their peers. So I would suggest a framework to you. In considering this, the first thing you must do is ask, what are the financial implications to the district? What's it going to do to our credit rating? Remember, we have to go out and get an interest rate on our bond. If that bond rate is high, suddenly the cost goes up. After that, if you decide we can be healthy after we empty out $1.3 million plus whatever we get back, then you need to say, what else could this money be used for? So I just want to go through a little bit of that. The impact on the financial status. I'm going to pull out some comments that I pulled from your documents that were troubling to me. The Board of Ed's Finance Committee on September 23rd, these are what the minutes say. District reserves need to be kept at a reasonable level to ensure a strong bond rating. We were also told that expenditures are outpacing revenues due to taxes being held to tax cap restraints. We were also told we're expecting shortfalls. Revenue shortfalls are expected based on the current expenses in the 2021 budget. Let's look at our audited financial statements. What did our accountants say? Our accountant made a point of saying that we're going to have to go out and get a bond with an interest rate. And the accountant said, it is important to maintain a certain amount of fund balance, that's the amount of all our reserves, as it directly affects the district's credit rating. In order to secure a favorable interest rate, the amount of fund balance will have a direct impact on the credit rating. That needs to be discussed. I will also say, in terms of our funding, I haven't heard it discussed, but I'm sure you must be aware that the state is projecting a $6 billion shortfall in its budget this year. Now, some of you, I'm thinking Maureen and Jody, who've been around the block a few times with this with me, we remember what happened the last time the state had a bad shortfall. We had the GEA, the Gap Elimination Allowance. They took money from schools. We are still owed several $1 million from the state, and we're never going to get it. But I think we need to anticipate the state may give us less this year, or we certainly shouldn't expect a lot more. This goes to the decision, do we empty out these reserves for this project?
Lisa, you're about 5 minutes right now, so are you
That's
wrapping
okay.
up?
I asked you before, there's no time limit, and remember, this is a hearing, it's not public comment. This is given to us by law so that we can give you feedback. And I will also say that when you set the agenda, you put a time limit on the public comment, but not on this. So I'll just continue. I don't have a lot. I'm going to read that. I probably have a few minutes more on this, and then I'm going to read the letter. We have a very tight budget, okay? At the last finance meeting, which I couldn't attend.
I think you need to try to wrap up, okay? Because even though it was a hearing, your comments are really about the bond. You could speak during public comment again if you want to.
This goes directly to the $200,000. Again, if you do the hearing wrong, then you can't take out the reserves. So if you want to just give me a couple more minutes and let me finish my statement, you're not at risk. That's what I would recommend to you. You're the president, so you can rule on that. You're in charge of conducting the meeting.
Please continue this.
Thank you. Our budgets are really tight. Remember last year, 200 people went upstairs because we were going to reduce music by one spot and we were going to cut music. You should know there are line items in our budgets for repairs and for maintenance. These funds could go to some of that project and free up budget room, okay? At the last Finance Committee meeting, there was discussion about cutting aids. That was a huge issue last year, cutting aids. It was a big issue for SEPTA. They didn't want aids cut. It is being discussed. I am very afraid that using this will make us house poor, as they say. Let me just look, I'll see what else we have. I also want to say we have unscheduled repairs that go into the 6 figures every year that these funds could be used for. I will also add that the time pressure on the bond has been lifted because last year the district projected enrollment at Hillside at 646. We were off by 23 people. It's only 623 and it's projected next year to be 595. The housing crunch is easing up over there. As Zamir mentioned, taxes. We've been told in the enterprise and in the document that this will have no impact on taxes. I don't understand how that can be. We have $3.5 million in that 5-year plan of repairs. This is 1.3. The money has to come from somewhere. We have 2 people with MBAs, I think, from Columbia. I would love them to answer. How can it be that it won't impact taxes? Zamir talked about credibility. Help us believe you because we don't understand it. I will also add, just a couple hints on how to save money. Jackie Weitzman, who couldn't be here tonight, suggested $130,000 dedicated for air conditioning in the cafe to move the library. You don't have to move the library. You have a more beautiful space where the library currently is. It's the same size as the cafe if you take down the 2 walls, and it's already air conditioned. So you can then move those other spaces to the cafe and have a library with 2 gorgeous walls of windows that look out on the woods and save $130,000. Here's another one. The plan includes 4 supersized classrooms. Now, I said at the last meeting, we don't need more supersized classrooms. The state requires you to supersize for kindergarten, 920 square feet, not 770, okay? And I said, we have 10 classrooms already. We'll never have 10 kindergartens. And it was said at the meeting after I had left that they're not all in the kindergarten first grade wing. They actually are. And I would just ask perhaps Joe Moderano to provide blueprints to everyone. We have 10 classrooms, supersized. So those 4 other ones, if you don't supersize them, bring them down to 770, that frees up 600 square feet. You can use that for your storage, you can use that, it gives you room to play with. Those square footage numbers are based on New York State, not on schools like Hastings that can afford to have 18 children in a classroom. These are based on New York City schools with 30 children in the classroom. We don't need to supersize those. I will also add, I heard a board member liken this to redoing his kitchen. It's not. Because when you redo your kitchen, you make your own financial decisions based on what you want. You are fiduciaries here. Fiduciary means you are held to a higher standard, a more conservative standard, because this is taxpayer money. So if you are on the fence as a fiduciary, you should lean towards the safer side. I will conclude by reading this letter. It should only take me about 2 minutes, but I want to point out that this was sent to the board on Wednesday, signed by over 45 people. And these are people who, if you looked at the names, who are traditionally supporters of the school. And I'm one of them. I'm a former president of this board. This list has many former PTSA exec board members, several former PTSA presidents, 3 people who worked here for years and years and retired from here. And this is what we believe is supporting the school. To say, please, don't make us cash poor, don't make us house poor. This isn't adding a science lab. We can have a beautiful design. Ray did a great job of giving us everything we need. Just as we did for the old bond on the field, it was smaller than some people wanted and bigger than some people wanted. And guess what? We all love it now. So with that, I'm going to read the letter just so that it's in the record because everybody couldn't come here tonight. I will also say, sadly, that I had hoped the board would respond to us, and the board didn't with the letter, and the board didn't even send a receipt of acknowledgement. I'm not sure what that was about, but we were disappointed. Dear board, superintendent, and business official, we are residents of Hastings and writing to share our concerns about increasing the scope of the school bond at a cost of approximately $2.3 million more than was originally approved. While we very much want to support the district's proposals, and many of us have supported most or all of your proposals, including the bond, this one misses the mark for us, and at this juncture, we just don't see ourselves being able to cast a yes vote for the current proposal. Here are a few concerns. The expansion seems unnecessary. The new architects presented the board with 2 attractive versions of the Hillside Edition, both which supply what was promised in the original. The designs are almost the same, except that one version is 20% bigger, which we feel is simply not needed. There has been no discussion about the potential financial harm depleting 2 reserve funds could cause to the district. The board's finance committee and accountants have both recently warned of the critical importance of maintaining our reserve balances because of the impact reserves have on the district's credit rating, and yet the proposed financing of the expansion reduces overall reserves by as much as 15% according to the board's fact sheet. The repeated assurances that increasing the scope of the bond by $2.3 million won't impact our taxes seems inaccurate. We just cannot see how taxes won't go up because of emptying the 2 reserve funds. The district's 5-year building repair replace plan shows over $3 million in prioritized work that will be needed in the next few years. With no or greatly reduced usable reserves, the only place for this funding will be the taxpayer. And the bond itself is already set to raise taxes by nearly $450 per year on the average taxpayer without the expansion. The remainder of the expansion's funding seems vague and not sufficiently defined to support moving forward. The suggestion that $900 could be paid for by using in-house construction staff and lesser materials or changing scope is too amorphous at this juncture to support Reliance. Please know that this is not a complaint. To the contrary, we thank all of you, and we very much appreciate your time and efforts. But as a sizable group of residents representing a spectrum of ages, incomes, and situations, we feel that our input could be valuable. It is our wish that you decide to not go forward using these reserve funds, and that you don't go forward with the vote in February, as we believe it will not pass. We believe the new architect's 12,500 square foot design will give the community what it voted for. It will be exceptionally artfully designed, and it won't cause any additional drain on the district's finances or the residents. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to your response. Thank you.
Resident of Hastings. I'll keep my remarks brief. I share a lot of the feelings about the steps that are being taken towards the additional expenses, but this public hearing is about a specific resolution for a specific purpose. This purpose of the resolution is to transfer money from a repair fund to the capital reserve fund. But we all know what the capital reserve fund is going to be used for subsequently. It's to build a building. You don't use repair funds to build a building.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Eva Buhastra, and I'm a parent in this community. And I will be medium brief, but I will start by saying that my first child started at Hillside about 20 years ago. Things have changed dramatically. She's now a grown-up with a real and important job. But Hillside never changed. My husband and I spent 15 consecutive years at Hillside packing lunches for our 3 children and watching Hillside being crowded and minimally maintained. It's been the same complex, stuck in time, struggling with capacity and services all these years. The proposed space and improved services at Hillside are long overdue. The school district, at the behest of educators and parents, has finally decided to remedy these shortcomings. The district has conducted a very thorough process. Due to dissatisfaction with the work of the previous firm, a wide net was cast to evaluate the options that the district might have. Community members and design professionals have helped to select a very experienced and capable firm, PBW, and this firm has done a careful job of presenting possible solutions. Building schools is complicated and mired in red tape. As an architect in private practice, I have much more leeway to increase or decrease budgets as necessary. I do not need a referendum every step of the way. This is not the case in school construction. Preliminary estimates are notoriously inaccurate. It would have been beneficial if the initial estimate for Hillside addition was more conservative and higher. We could be here today breathing sigh of relief that the actual cost was lower. Unfortunately, the initial estimate was poorly done and did not allow for a number of aspects: the difficult and hilly terrain, the tariffs and cost increases for materials, elements that could bring quality to educational environment as defined in 2020, and grace to the design that the children are growing up with. The original H2M design had a warehouse quality to it and received a negative response when it was presented to the community. Even if we wanted it, and if it had gone into development, the costs would have gone up. The Rivertown's Enterprise is one of my favorite reads. However, I was very disappointed with the recent headlines, such as PBW design is $2 million above budget. This is a sensationalist and panic-inducing headline suggesting the school funds are being pillaged, misappropriated, and unwisely used. This is untrue and unfair. Instead, the headline should have read as follows: H2M estimate falls $2 million short of the necessary and appropriate costs. This board and its members have taken on a task that can be difficult. Work for the good of the school community. The good of the community includes spending public funds on long-term investments wisely. Building something which will be here for decades carries a responsibility which includes cost and quality. Design can be beneficial or detrimental. I'd like to support staying the course, taking the long view, and finding the best design which will benefit the youngest students and the community as a whole for decades to come. Thank you.
Anyone else interested in making comments in public hearing?
Hi, my name is Dan Sprague. I just want to voice my strong support of the addition, whatever it takes.
Give your name and address, city you live in Hastings.
Daniel J. Sprague, 35 Hillside Avenue, Hastings on Hudson, 10706. I just want to voice my strong support of the bond, of borrowing funds, whatever needs to get done. Anyone that takes issue with this needs to bring up the mayor and the board of trustees about condos, multifamily units being built, overcrowding in general. I've had 2 children go through. I have a child in it now, and I have 1 in preschool that's going to be coming through, and this is overdue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So we will, I guess, end the public hearing, and let me just ask, because we've shuffled some stuff around, we do have official public comment. If there's something someone would like to make a comment outside of this, this vote, is there someone who would like to make a public comment now on a different topic? Okay, this is public comment, so this is...
3 minutes. I'll be like 1 minute, okay? I just wanted to bring up, I sat in on the facilities committee meeting this week, and one of the things that came up was our RFP process, that, you know, how we get bids and how actually the law requires us to get multiple bids. And I just think we're not doing it right, because I saw something in today's agenda that struck me. So we have an RFP out right now for a master scheduler, and the closing date of that RFP is January 3rd. But then I saw, I don't know, maybe it got tabled, but I saw that there's an invoice for the master schedule on today's agenda, and I don't think that that complies with law and policy if the RFP time is still open. Thank you. Oh, Lisa Eggert-Litfin.
Thank you. Okay, now, on this ever-moving agenda, this is officially the most complicated board meeting I've ever had to run, so everyone please hang with me here as I try to regain the exact bearings. I believe we are on the middle school action plan now. And with that, I will pass the meeting over to you, Dr. Peter.
Actually, we have the middle school team, so Ms. Kipper, Mr. Keogh, Mr. Stevens, Mr. Blum, and Ms. Mateo Toledo, if you would come forward and go to the podium, and we have your presentation here, and I believe you can operate that. You have to refresh. You have to refresh. This is the action plan, middle school action plan.
Good evening. Working closely with our new superintendent and assistant superintendent, and in keeping with the goals of the district, we've created an action plan that will enhance our practices in the middle school. While the impetus for this plan was to provide supports to a few subgroups that the state has identified as not making adequate progress, the actions within this plan are universal and will support all of our learners. We've taken into consideration transitions from Hillside to Farragut and Farragut to Hastings High School. In addition, we've worked closely with our Special Education Director, Laura Sullivan, and our Assistant Director, Tesfa Stewart, as well as our E&L Coordinator, Janice Mateo Toledo. This has been an inclusive process, whose ideas and thoughts came from a multitude of people. Here tonight with me are Chris Keogh, our Assistant Principal, Janice Mateo Toledo, our E&L and Diversity Coordinator, Josh Blum, our English Department Chair, and Greg Stevens, our Math Chair. They'll all walk us through some of the steps in this plan.
We will begin with providing an overview of the structure of our plan. Our plan was developed as a result of our leadership meetings with Valerie and Melissa, and we consider it to be a comprehensive response to the needs of our students. Our development process was extensive, as we wanted to make sure the voices of our various stakeholders were included. We began by reviewing the goals set out by our board and superintendent and assistant superintendent as articulated at the September 23rd board meeting. We are eager to support these goals through this plan and to support our efforts to promote coherence throughout the district. In seeing our place within the system, we valued the role of vertical articulation in developing this plan. We reviewed procedures and processes at Hillside and worked closely with high school administration. Additionally, we have had numerous meetings with our director and assistant director of special education and have had the opportunity to incorporate their feedback into our plan. As they are leading a comprehensive review of Indicator 13, we have worked elements of this into our long-term planning. Additionally, we have met with our Director of E&L Services to ensure all of our efforts reflect our diverse population, and we will explore this more in later slides.
Additionally, we've spent time reviewing and analyzing the shifts as part of the next generation standards. This has included professional learning on our part and close work with our department chairs. This is an ongoing process. We've also begun reviewing the tenets of New York State's culturally responsive, sustaining education framework, which we find to be a bold way to review and enhance our instructional practices. Lastly, we have administered and reviewed surveys related to transitions, supports, and schedules.
When developing the action plan, we were encouraged to consider 4 domains: curriculum, instruction, assessment, and learning environment. We spent time working within these domains and the different action steps that we wanted to take. We are people of action, so we had lots and lots of ideas about how to move forward. Once we discussed all of the things that we wanted to accomplish within these domains, we saw 3 strands emerge. Increased data literacy, which aligns with our assistant superintendent's stated goal. The next generation standards, which aligns with the upcoming shift in state standards. And supporting our students, which aligns with our core belief as a middle school that this is a critical period in a young person's development and that our focus should always be on how to best support students academically, socially, mentally, and emotionally. Moving forward, we will present our plan of action through this framework.
Moving on to the domains. Our curriculum domain was our first review, and you'll note the ways in which our actions break down under the 3 strands. We begin with data literacy. When we promote data literacy, we can ensure that curricular decisions we make are related to a review of the data. For example, time spent on different content can be responsive and should be responsive to the needs of our students. This will also support our efforts to map out curriculum, ensuring vertical articulation as students move forward on their educational journey in Hastings. In the context of the forthcoming next generation standards, we've set as an objective work related to ensuring alignment between curriculum materials and the new standards in science, language arts, and mathematics. This will involve professional learning, space, materials, and time for collaboration among our faculty and our staff. Additionally, we plan to hold information sessions with the community at large to keep them aware about the impending changes and to mirror their efforts to support their children.
Lastly, in supporting our learners, we've spent a lot of time working within the realm of Indicator 13. As such, we see the role in which supporting a student's efforts to transition to college and career can begin with curriculum in the very early grades. This work entails close collaboration with our directors of special education and guidance. In moving ahead to the instructional domain, you'll see that our efforts to promote increased data literacy is linked to action related to enhanced data sources and methods of analysis in identifying groups of learners for targeted instruction. We believe wholeheartedly that increased data literacy on the part of our school community will lead to instruction being more responsive to student needs. Additionally, the next generation standards bring with it some shifts in instructional practices. For example, we need to support our math teachers as they move to ever more conceptual understandings of mathematics for our students, and support our teachers working with with texts with even more complexities. This work requires professional learning through workshops, team time, department time, and faculty meetings. Our interventionists have also been pivotal in unpacking these shifts and supporting our faculty.
Lastly, to support these changes in instruction, we want to consider the ways we can support learners with different needs. This includes enhanced social emotional outreach through our support team and programs such as homework help or a summer bridge program. In enacting this action plan, we want to ensure the cultural and identity needs of students are reflected in our instructional approaches. And this is work we believe is well underway at Farragut with our collaboration with Diane Goodman, our work on the topic of implicit bias, our work with Dr. Deetra Price-Dennis, who Ms. Mateo Toledo introduced us to, as we collaborated on the Multicultural Book Club for students, and the rollout of our Courageous Conversations curriculum in grades 6 through 8. When we came to the domain of assessment, we reflected on the role of the different types of assessments we develop and/or administer. One assessment that drives a lot about how we work as a district is the New York State assessments in mathematics and English language arts. Because these exams are administered to all students in grade 3 through 8, we are the only school in the district in which a state assessment is formally administered to every student every year. This may have implications for how our school is labeled, and our rates of refusal may have an impact on how our school is measured. One goal we have in the area of assessment is to promote awareness about the exam and what it entails, and to make efforts to reduce our rates of refusals while respecting the decisions of our well-informed families. Assessments administered by the state are being aligned to the next generation standards on a gradual rollout basis, and we are preparing for these new assessments. Faculty is working within teams and departments to unpack some of the changes to the exams and to update their assessments to match the structures and the standards administered through the new NGSS-aligned state exams.
Lastly, we want to ensure that as we work within the domain of assessment, we continue to support our learners in the ways they demonstrate their own learning. We will work together with faculty to promote increased opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning in different ways, such as projects and portfolios. Just this year, one of our teachers ran a small pilot during parent-teacher conferences on student-led conferences. This is an example of the ways in which we are looking to promote student ownership over learning, and perhaps even the restructuring of parent-teacher conferences. We also want to increase the number of checkpoints for student learning in advance of summative assessments. These include state exams, but also end-of-term exams and unit assessments. This work has involved working with district administration to review programs like Achieve and Dreambox. We are also considering the administration of universal screeners at the start of school and then again at the end. The core of our work revolved around the learning environment. We see this work also being enriched by our efforts to promote data literacy. This includes the use of data in our PBIS program and the involvement of students in our PBIS initiatives. Additionally, we've administered a school-wide climate survey, which will help us to target supports and interventions based on student feedback. With the next generation standards articulating changes for students, we want to ensure that we maintain and promote engaging learning environments that support children's efforts to apply content to solve real-world problems. We understand that the shifts are felt differently by all stakeholders, and we want to make sure we keep our eyes on the needs of students as we roll out these new initiatives.
Lastly, we're looking to work on 3 goals over the next few years as we enact the elements of this action plan. We're eager to promote student leadership in the different grades, and this work is manifested in new student organizations and attendance at conferences. We're also looking to support students' emotional literacy, and this is best done through the use of the Ruler program and the mood meter tools, which our support team facilitate on a daily basis. Lastly, we're working together with multiple stakeholders to develop a schedule that addresses barriers of access and promotes culturally relevant and sustaining practices for all students. We will conclude by reviewing the point people, resources, and next steps will be taken. As you can see, this plan is far-reaching and involves the work of multiple point people. Some of these people are listed here in these slides, but there are many others whose expertise and experience are helping to drive our efforts.
Each bullet point of our action plan requires different resources. As opposed to sharing an exhaustive list, an idea of some of the resources we will be using include books and other curricular materials, time for collaboration and staff to work together, funding, the next generation the next generation standards, and the definition of the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. Janice Mateo Toledo has done a lot of work around this, so we invited her to briefly expand upon what the CRSE framework entails.
Hi. So this year, New York State released the Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework. And the document is revolutionary and one of the first released by New York State that begins by recognizing the complex system of biases and structural inequities that are deeply rooted in our country's history, culture, and institutions. It acknowledges that these biases must be clearly understood, directly challenged, and fundamentally transformed by incorporating an equity and inclusion lens into every aspect of our work with children. The document states, New York State understands that the responsibility of education is not only to prevent the exclusion of historically silenced, erased, and disenfranchised groups, but also to assist in the promotion and perpetuation of cultures, languages, and ways of knowing that have been devalued, suppressed, and imperiled by years of educational, social, political, economic neglect, and other forms of oppression. The action plan we created includes 4 of the tenets to the framework, which are ensuring a welcoming and affirming environment, high expectations and rigorous instruction, inclusive curriculum and assessment, and ongoing professional development. This action plan welcomes participation from our students, teachers, school leaders, district leaders, families, and community members to work toward the goal of creating student-centered learning environments that affirm racial, linguistic, and cultural identities, prepare students for rigor and independent learning, develop students' abilities to connect across lines of difference, elevate historically marginalized voices, and empower students as agents of change. This document validates the diversity and inclusion work our district has supported for the past few years, particularly in the middle school, and was a critical resource that our stakeholders used when designing the action plan. So once again, Hastings continues to be ahead of the curve.
For some examples of the next steps we plan to take at the building level, we've identified some here. As we've explained, we already began with steps around collaboration with the different stakeholders involved. Special education director, E&L director, department chairs, faculty and staff, and community. We look forward to our continued work with these groups of people as we enact the different parts of this plan. Additionally, we've developed a scheduling committee. The committee is comprised of building and district leaders, teachers, department chairs, and specialists from different areas. Early meetings have involved mapping out an ideal schedule and identifying barriers to access. We're excited to see where this work takes us. Additionally, we've begun work in teams to review data. As we've just wrapped up our first marking period, building administration will be meeting with our support team to review the portfolios of different students to better monitor their progress. We also have some guests coming in to support our efforts. Our district leaders have coordinated with inclusive schooling. Our director and assistant director of special education have spoken highly of inclusive schooling after hearing its founder speak at a conference in Syracuse. Additionally, our district leaders have brought Mr. Marin Bloom, who will be helping to review our schedule and make recommendations. God bless you. He comes highly recommended. We've also begun working with Tracy Tyler from Southern Westchester BOCES in the area of differentiated instruction. Our first kickoff with our faculty is at our next late start. We're all excited to see where these forms of collaboration bring us. And all of this is on top of our wonderful work with GNR. Other work involves our rollout of restorative circles, which Mr. Keogh has taken the lead on, and which Ms. Bellis is co-chairing. Our expanding of the PBIS committee to include students, which was led by Ms. Frank. Our request for programs such as homework help and the summer bridge programs, and our school climate survey. We believe these steps put us on track to achieving many of the goals we've outlined this evening. It's now my pleasure to introduce, you all know, Josh Blum and Greg Stevens.
I would have dragged you up with me. As with many challenges, we feel fortunate to have new data available to us, and the question for us, I think, as teachers is, what's the best way to maximize this, given the time, the limits on time and the limits on resources? In terms of a typical classroom, we're trying to figure out where we should be making shifts on the macro level. What changes that our neediest students what needs that our neediest students have will be best served by sort of addressing them on a more global, more macro level, so that all students can benefit from attention to areas where we as a district may be not living up to our own expectations. And how do we address the students whose needs are greatest on a more micro, individualized level? As we move forward with the process, we'll be constantly monitoring these things, and Greg's going to talk about a couple of areas where we can address them directly.
So a good example of that is to look at our academic intervention services. So Gail talked about the fact that we have a scheduling committee. We're rethinking how the actual scheduling of events happens. Josh talked about micro and macro perspectives and effects. Right now, we've worked very hard to have academic intervention services that are available to a great number of students. Clearly, through our analysis of this material, our next step is to try to focus on how to reorganize AIS so that we have it grouped much more specifically by need. So that's moving from the sort of macroscopic idea that we know we have students who need this support, and we have the resources to do that, to now trying to focus at that micro level of getting the right groupings of kids so that we can focus on content material itself. I want to talk about one more thing also. The NGSS has come up a few times. Those are the next generation state standards. And on the macroscopic level, that gives us the chance to review curriculum, something that we should always be doing, not just to the standards we have, but as the standards themselves are dynamic and evolve. On the sort of the microscopic level, what that gives us the chance to, and what we should be doing through this action plan, is seeing how we can take those standards, those evolving sort of dynamic standards, and use that as a lens to try to figure out how best to actually deliver the content in ways that work for our children in class, and in ways that have a sense not just of scope, but of appropriate sequence. So in terms of the classroom, just to wrap up our section of it, we have a sort of a big picture plan, and the big picture plan sort of has to play out at that exact level of the child in the classroom. And so that's sort of our next step, and that's what we're here to represent, is that move from the idea to an action.
Thank you. And as Chris said, we are people that, what was the expression? We're people of action. We're people of action. Anyhow, that wraps up our presentation. It really was a pleasure to have the opportunity really to work on this plan with all of our colleagues, the tremendous insight from everyone involved, terrific leadership from Valerie and Melissa. You really have helped guide this, so we really thank you for that. We appreciate your partnership, and we're available for questions if you have any.
Thank you all for such a magnificent job in presenting this and working so well together, modeling for the system how this work takes place. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I would like to echo Dr. Henning-Piedmont's comments. I really appreciate all the hard work, the dedication, the collaboration, and the thoughtfulness that is going into this work in support of all students. So thank you.
Does anyone on the board have any questions?
Yeah. Thank you, Gail, Chris, Greg, Josh, for the presentation. So, Janice, sorry, Janice as well, sorry. First question just comes to mind, listening through it. Yeah, don't go anywhere.
Stay a while.
Oh, well, you thought you were going home.
There's a vision, there's a plan. How do you benchmark success? What approach, what frequency, and what sharing of progress?
I'm sorry,
How do you benchmark success?
say it again?
How do you benchmark success? What approach? Benchmarking. So this is not 3 months from now, 2 weeks from now, 8 weeks from now. This is clearly, what you effectively described is a philosophical approach to directing your school and the experience that children are going to have going through your school. That's what I heard. So I guess the question that comes to me is, as you're framing out this plan, what are the thoughts around how you're benchmarking change and success? So what's the approach to that benchmarking? What's the frequency of that benchmarking? And what's the sharing of progress? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think the benchmarking is one of the things that we need to look at is a universal screener, which we don't have right now. I've discussed that with our superintendent. One of the areas that make MTSS much more complicated for us is that we're not working with a screener that will norm all of our children. So our benchmarks now, we do benchmark kids. We do screeners at the beginning of the year, the end of the year, and we progress monitor in our classrooms. But if we had a universal screener, years ago, or was it STAR? I think that we iReady. We tried iReady, and that was a disaster for our district. But there are other screeners that I believe we need to be looking at so that we can norm everyone at the beginning of the year and do at least 2 benchmarks beginning of the year or the end of the year. For now, without that, we have our own in-house screeners, and so we benchmark children, and then in the skills class, we're progress monitoring, and then we're working with it within the MTSS structure.
That actually covers it, because
I'm sorry.
That covers it, because you touched on frequency, and I guess if you get a universal screener, you share at the child level the output of that universal screener. So that just in the interest of time, that jumps to kind of another question that jumped out at me as the early pages of the assessment piece and the data and the reducing the rate of refusal. So like I hear that, and then I think about Hastings, and I think that those two things are wildly unconnected with each other. How do you do that?
Well, I think that we have to have very real conversations with our parents about what this testing entails. We have parents that object to their children taking these tests. We respect those objections. We also then have to be aware that there are consequences to the refusals of taking these tests. My understanding is that youngsters who are refusing these tests are given a score of a 1. That score of a 1 is impacting how we are seen as a school and as a district. So we definitely respect our well-informed families, as we talked about before, but we also have to understand that if the children that are refusing are scored as a 1, and it puts us in a place where we will get labeled by the state as a school district that's a target district or a focus district or whatever label, those may be the consequences that we need to be prepared to accept.
Great. Yeah, I don't think people know. I don't think people know that.
Pardon me?
I do not think families know that or are aware of that. But I think families are acutely aware of the rating of the school in some kind of macro sense. So that's it for my questions. Thank you.
Sure.
So if you don't mind me adding a point, on December 10th, last Tuesday, a week ago from tomorrow, for the first time in the math night presentation that I do, I asked parents to consider whether they would please send their kids to our state test. That's the first time in many years of doing this, and it was part of that. So to your question about benchmarking, we have one aspect that is very much related to the school as a larger system, but we also want our individual events along the way to align with our mission. So part of the advantage of having a plan was knowing that then that gave me, in some ways, the chance to speak very directly, but not in a pushy fashion at all, to just say, here's a consequence I'd like us to consider changing.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question just to kind of piggyback on Tim's. I appreciate the presentation. It did feel, I forget what the word Tim said, but it felt like very 40,000 feet. If you had to think about what sort of the highest short-term priorities are, if you're prioritizing, how would you kind of look at the prioritization?
I appreciate that question. It does feel like 40,000 feet, and I guess, in essence, that's what an action plan is. But I think if we really think in terms of what our priorities, the burning priority, I would have to say that our MTSS is critical in determining which children need what supports. And in order to really drill down deeply to understand students' needs, we do need a universal screener. We need something that's going to give us an across-the-board benchmark of where our youngsters are so that we can then begin to target the instruction. One of the issues, Jeremy, has been that in our AIS classes, we have children with various needs. It's very hard, even if it's a class of 7 or 8 in a math class, if their needs are so divergent, it's very hard to be able to do justice for each child. If we had a universal screener, if we were able to really target in on specific skills, we'd then be able to work with youngsters on those specific skills for shorter periods of time, and they'd be released to go out of their tier 2 class or whatever it is. So I'd say, and I know again, I read it was a disaster, but I would say a universal screener of sorts would be critical.
And what are the checkpoints? Like what, a lot of times we get these presentations and then 6 months later, in June we hear more. What are the checkpoints, or how often will we be kind of getting updates on progress?
In the action plan, embedded in the action plan is a timeline. I don't have that in front of me, but for every one of our actions, there is a timeline that's outlined. Much of this work, some of this work is ongoing right now. For instance, the scheduling work that we're doing. We've had 2 or 3 meetings. Our high school folks have been involved in that. We've already begun that. Next generation standards, aligning our curriculum with those standards. Professional learning has happened around that. Melissa's running the professional learning committee. So we've started an awful lot of what's going on, and we have prioritized all of the work within the action plan with the timer.
Do we have a copy of the
Our
timer?
superintendent will tell us when, will invite us back for periodic reporting out.
Can we get a copy of the timer?
Sure. If you would share the timeline, Gail, with us, we'll make sure that we get it to the board.
Sure.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you for preparing the plan and collaborating to do so. I just have a question of where the students fit into the plan and what experiences are you looking to be transformed for them?
Where the students fit in. Well, hopefully the students are at the very core of this plan. I'm sorry, repeat the question.
What experiences are you looking to be transformed for the students in this plan?
Well, I think that Janice also spoke to part of that. I think we're looking to expand and enhance the learning environment so that it becomes more inclusive. I think primarily that would be a short answer. We're working closely with the special education department. We're looking to create more inclusive school and more inclusive classrooms that are culturally relevant and sustaining.
Kind of just one thing along that student side, and just to keep in the back of your mind, just and I say this just because it jumped out at me as interesting, the learning environments domain, the next gen standards, it's really a sort of a student issue that you raise here that's as opposed to the supporting our learners. But this line, this bullet, learning environment that supports children's efforts to apply content to solve problems. And then Chris really covered this, and he said, solve real world problems. And it's just something that as a parent of a current middle schooler and a rising middle schooler, I heard that. I like it a lot because of the solving real world problems. So if you just keep that in the back of your mind as you're really applying this to the curriculum piece of the work, and to Lauren's questions in terms of how does this plan impact students, it's just something that out of the whole presentation is one line that really jumped out at me. So just
so let me respond to that, because to Lauren's question, which was how does this impact children, Mr. Keogh has led an initiative of student leaders, and these student leaders who attended the training at the Holocaust Center have come back, and they have decided that they wanted one of the people who they observed at this training to come speak to our children. So they wrote a grant, and they're going to be presenting this grant to the Race Matters Committee tomorrow afternoon. So in terms of solving and working on real world issues, this group of 7 or 8 youngsters who I believe are in 7th grade went to this conference and saw something that was extremely worthwhile, spoke to Mr. Keogh and Ms. Bellis about bringing it back, wrote a grant, and now they're going to see the Race Matters Committee tomorrow. Now, of course, it's going to get approved. They don't know that it's going to get approved yet, but that's the sort of thing that, to your point, Lauren, what are the transformational things that we're doing? That's one of them. We're turning ownership over to our youngsters more and more.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Very well.
Thank you, everyone. So next on the agenda, and Valerie, I just want to check in with you here. Is this a presentation for us to go through now, or is this something we can review? This is the co-curricular and extracurricular activities. I'm conscious of the fact that it's starting to snow outside and people need to get home, so I just was curious what...
This was a request from our several board trustees to better understand the co-curricular, extracurricular program, which are basically our after-school programs, K-12. So the principals represented a few things in the slides, their current lineup of co-curricular activities, as well as those that they would like to bring in and make available. Now, the only school that doesn't have the same number of co-curricular activities would be Hillside. And they're asking for 2. Most of their programs are funded, or are offered by outside organizations that are not funded by the district. So parents do have to pay to participate or have their children participate in those. And that's one of the fundamental questions that led to this conversation, is this notion of equity across the schools. So we certainly don't have to do a formal presentation, but I think the principals would certainly not, fall on the ground and cry, right? You'd be just fine. But if you have questions about this, I think it would be, this would be the time to share those questions. And I want to thank the principals again, who are features of board meetings regularly, and we appreciate your time. We appreciate how you shed light on a number of these issues with regards to the work that's occurring in the schools, which is probably not something that has happened in the past. So I want to acknowledge all of the work that you're doing and have done to make sure that we're fully informed of what's going on in your buildings. So I defer to the board with regards to any questions while they're still here.
Yeah. So as everyone reviewed this, either specific programs or numbers of programs at any of the schools, does anyone have any questions?
Sorry, I'm just echoing Dr. Henning-Piedmont's thank you for your presentations. It's so helpful for us to hear what your approach is and what your next steps are. I was wondering if any thought had been given towards implementing robotics at some point. I don't know where that would fit in but I just noticed that wasn't on the list. There's so much going on, and I know we can't get to everything, but that was one thing that jumped out at me, was implementing that just for the excitement of competition, and it just seems to be growing and growing, so I'm just curious if that's something.
Any particular school, middle?
I don't know, I don't know whether the educators would request that it start lower, yeah.
We're starting a brand new robotics lesson this year in the second semester. So we will be having a robotics program. And that started with robotics club last year.
Okay, in high school.
Foundation, they provided some funding to many robotic kits that we'll be using in class.
Is that when robotics usually starts, or does it usually, do we need to be competitive early? Do they usually begin earlier, and then, that's a conversation maybe to have when we'd like to see it begin. Otherwise, I thought there was a really nice spread in the offerings.
Thank you. Yes, I can respond on behalf of Amy and John, who could not be here today for Hillside. I do know that robotics is an offering by the Recreation Department that some of our students participate in, and Hillside is sensitive to honoring the community's offerings in addition to their own Schedule B positions.
Okay.
Was there also, I heard talk about chess maybe at the elementary school? I know you guys have in the middle school, right? And was there, I don't know if you know that or not, if there's been any talk about chess. I know some people were interested. It's a paid-for thing now? Is that what it is?
This is another, I do know that's another offering by the Recreation Department. Beyond that, I'm not aware of any additional discussions.
So at the middle school, it's a district funded, is that what it is? But elementary, it would be town funded?
That's correct.
Got it.
There's also chess at the high school.
Does anyone have any further questions about the extracurriculars? Great. Thank you for putting this list together.
It'd be great to see crossing borders back.
Okay. We're going to move over now to, I guess, just two quick conversations. Two conversations. One is we've got Ray Dovell and Rena. And Rena, how do I pronounce your last name? Mandy, okay. Rena Mandy here from PBDW. What we've asked them to do is share some more details about the design and the evolution. I know that one of the things that can be hard is, as these very complex projects are evolving, is to keep track of all of the decisions that are being made. And so what we've asked them to do is put together a little bit more detail. Again, you can find this on board docs. It was just posted about an hour and a half ago as they were working on some stuff, but they're going to walk us through some of that right now, and then the board will have an opportunity to ask some further questions if needed. Please. Yeah, I think that'd probably be most helpful, because you need the mic.
You mean it should be on board docs? Just use yours.
While they're getting set up, my name is Ray Dovell. I'm a partner at Plattmeyer Dovell White Architects in New York. I am also a 20-year resident of Hastings-on-Hudson. Both my daughters, Ada and Frances, are K through 12 graduates of the Hastings school systems, and very impressed with them.
Can you just bring it a little bit closer to you, just so it's a little bit louder?
Yeah. Better? Okay, I'll just hold it. And Rena Mande is also, just by pure coincidence, a Hastings graduate as well, and who has been the co-designer and project manager for this. So it's been a wonderful process. We're really thrilled to be doing this job. The first image that you're seeing here is where we are currently. This is the fully fleshed out design, which has been in development for some time now. But prior to completing this design, we took a step back to the original bond proposal, the original bond work that was done by H2M. And that was the basis of our initiation of the design work. This is the original bond presentation. This is very preliminary in nature. It may look a little bit finished, but this is really not a design. It is a concept. And as we went through this, if you can go to the next image, Rena, these were the floor plan diagrams. This exercise was a broad brush exercise to scope out the major components of the project. It was not intended at the time, I don't believe, to be a fully fleshed out program nor a fully fleshed out design. It addressed major components, but it did not address the detailed design requirements for the project. What we initially undertook was a programming exercise. That programming exercise was the result of working with the major stakeholders in the school to come up with specific requirements, granular requirements that would make this building a success and to perform the way it should perform. So the chart here that you see are program spaces and support spaces. Rena ran this exercise and she will take you through this now very briefly.
So the programming exercise was undertaken through a series of meetings with Hillside staff, department heads and principal, as well as questionnaires that we sent out for the teachers to complete. And so, this is a very brief result of that. We have detailed sheets for each space. But the cafetorium space, which is the flexible cafeteria auditorium space, really required, for cafeteria use, 280 people, which is 2 full grade levels at a time. So that enabled school lunches to go from 5 sessions to 3 sessions, which really freed up some class time, and that was a major component of this. The auditorium use, I know that Hillside packs out this auditorium with standing room in the back and every seat filled, and so that's over 540, but with the need even to go up to 600 people, and that's really for parents for the auditorium use. The stage to fit between from 60 to 100 students based on what performance is going on. The existing stage at Hillside was grossly undersized, and so we needed to have at least 800 square feet for that area. The kitchen for food service capacity for the cafeteria would require at least 650 square feet. The classrooms, it was identified that the biggest need was for kindergarten classrooms, and so the kindergarten classrooms now are on the first floor at the front of the building. They are the kindergarten size classrooms now are actually above 1,000 square feet. The code requirement per New York State is above 900. The classrooms on the first level at the back of the school meet that 900 level, but the mostly used classrooms at the front of the school for kindergarten are actually above 1,000 square feet. So there were 2 kindergarten-sized classrooms expressed for the greatest need, and then 2 second grade classrooms. And the existing classrooms in second grade are 900 square foot classrooms. So it was to meet the existing classroom size on the lower floor. Music lessons, there are early morning music lessons that do not have a space at all. And so to provide a space for that as well, for individual or small group size lessons. And then resource room as well, which is highly needed at Hillside.
So just running through the areas there, the support spaces were really, the spaces that make all of the program spaces work. So the toilet capacity for the auditorium and cafeteria use, so that you don't have to go into the classrooms to use facilities. Table storage, so that you can use the cafeteria space in a flexible manner, so that you can fold up the tables, roll them into storage, and then be able to roll out any seating. Sorry. There we go. The retractable seating, that was something that was specifically brought up by Amy, the elementary school principal, and was well received by the rest of everyone on the committee for retractable seating, for flexibility, the best flexibility of that space. An elevator, egress stair, storage to capitalize on the grade change and capture the space underneath the new building. Kitchen storage as well, a data room, and plumbing and mechanical areas, which were identified as we worked through the program and identified the needs for those spaces within the building footprint.
We then worked on a couple of different diagrams, and these diagrams are intended to compare the bond square footage with where we are currently. The red represent the overage over the bond and over the bond square footages, and we can go through them one by one. The stair if you look at the diagram on the left side, upper left side, there is a stair there. That stair was pushed out further than it needed to be for one reason, so that when sometime in the future you elected to add classrooms, that stair could stay where it was without having to demolish it. So that you would simply add another 2 or 3 or 4 classrooms along that corridor without having to demolish the stair. So that's item number 1. Further down, adjacent to the kitchen, there is an area for storage of tables. So it's a multi-purpose space. The tables that we're looking at now fold up on rollers and roll all into that storage area. So that was newer required space that we needed to accommodate. The third item is the long band of space. That is where the telescoping seating resides. And that telescoping seating is really an essential part of this design, because otherwise, if you shifted from a cafeteria use to an auditorium use, you would have to have somebody setting up 500 chairs. And that takes a long time. It's really not a practical thing to do. It's a drain on resources, and it just would mean scheduling would be very difficult. So telescoping seating, it comes out automatically. You move the tables, which would have to be done manually. The tables then roll back they nest beside the kitchen, and the tables extend. That was additional space. Then there is the linear space across the front facing the playground, which is let's call it a bay window. There was a desire from the educators to make a real direct connection to the playground. So this was an attempt to do that. The third item is at the vestibule. That allows the stage, because we rotated the stage from the front of the building, where it really turned a blind eye on the playground, to push it back towards the school center. We have an ability to have backstage spaces that link directly to the stage itself, rehearsal, green room areas, etc. That little vestibule in the front is a way to make that connection work properly. And the third and the biggest item is the below grade space, which you see on the right-hand diagram, the large block of space canted out at an angle. That space is made possible because the grade changes drastically. If you remember the first illustration that we showed you from the bond, the site slopes very steeply in that area. So this space really exists by virtue of the topography. It requires a little more excavation and enclosing it basically, but it is not expensive space. And it's a big block of space. And right now we're using it in this scheme, we're using it for storage and for mechanical space. Now, to talk about mechanical space, I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding. The major air handlers are not located on the pitched roof, they're located on the flat roof portions. That is identical to what the bond illustrated. However, you do need other spaces that require enclosure, such as boilers, electrical rooms, and plumbing areas. So those areas were not illustrated on the bond drawings, but they're needed. So if you aggregate all of the areas in red, you come up and subtract them, you come up with the bond square footage. So the next exercise was, what if we tried to create a design which got rid of most, but not quite all of that space? What would we have to do, and what are the consequences of doing that? So again, we'll start with the left diagram at the stair. We could move that stair back down, pick up some additional square footage, but in the event you elected to add later on, the stair would need to be demolished and relocated. We could then, down at the cafeteria, we could push that back into the building proper, into the higher zone, reduce the higher zone, shrink the cafeteria, shrink the kitchen area slightly and the storage area slightly, so you get a reduction there. That would take out a chunk of space, but we would need to confirm that this worked with the people actually doing the kitchen. In addition, there is a little bay window, the next block of space down, the small block there, that we think we can easily remove. It was a little bay window that looked out into the woods that can be eliminated easily. That's entirely possible. The fourth item is the linear strip where the telescoping seating resides. That could be pushed in slightly, but the downside of that is it pushes the front edge of the seating, when fully extended, very close to the stage, and it may create an uncomfortable relationship to the stage. But also by pushing the kitchen wing down, we will probably lose 3 gang seats across the back, and each of those contains 10 to 12 students. So there would be a reduction in seating capacity there. The stage in this condition also is slightly reduced, correct, Rena?
The stage in this scheme, because we pushed the entry forward, the stage shrunk. So the stage is actually under the 800 square feet that was part of the program requirements in this scheme. So it's 750. So it's just under that.
So one thing we have done, which is actually a double functioning space, is the stage is not a raised stage in this case. The stage is a flat floored stage so that we can use it for dining during the day. So it's a double functioning space, meaning that everyone sitting in the telescoping seating will have good vision of that space. So every seat will be a good seat from the point of view of sight lines. And the largest issue is the below grade space, which you can see on the right-hand diagram. Eliminating that eliminates a large chunk of space, approximately, what, Rena? 1,300 space. Now, the consequence of that is the storage area is entirely eliminated, but now we have no space for the mechanical systems. We could, in fact, put the mechanical systems where Rena's pointing now and reduce the size of the classroom slightly. So this is a possibility. These classrooms will be smaller, than classrooms, equivalent classrooms serving the same grades. But we will not lose the size of the kindergarten classrooms at the upper level. So this does not get rid of all of the area, it gets rid of some of the area, but there are some programmatic issues that would need to be addressed further to do this. So this is the alternate design for this. It's not fully worked out, but it gives you an idea of what we might achieve with some programmatic compromise. So that is pretty much. Is there anything else you can think of you wanted to?
No, I mean, I would just note that as Ray said, this is a diagram of the reduction of space. So this hasn't been through a full design process with the mechanical and plumbing engineers. And so, initially they reported that these plumbing and mechanical rooms up here are undersized for what the building would need. But they haven't gone through a whole exercise with this. This is really just a diagram. And just one thing to note about the square footage down here. So we would need to account for fill for that area because it is a result of the change of grade. And so that's something that hasn't been tackled in any estimate.
A comment was made earlier about the pitch of the roof. The pitch of the roof was intended to reduce the overall volume of the building in a way that made it a little more in scale with the hillside building itself. So we felt it was a really important component of the project. And here you see the inside. These panels at the ceiling are not, willfully done. These are as a result of acoustic considerations for natural acoustics within the space, sound deadening as well as sound reflection for proper use of the auditoriums when it's being used as an auditorium. So that is and then back to the design as it currently exists.
Thank you. I know this is, a presentation that the board has seen with, continued additional detail here with explanations annotated as we move to a vote. Does anyone on the board have any further questions?
So the storage space on the bottom, was my understanding that can also be easily converted to another classroom should it need to be.
That's correct. It could be because the floor level is roughly at grade as the other classrooms are along the back. So yes, you could convert that.
Mm-hmm. And your point about the strip on the outside of the cafeteria being pushed in is that you're not really meeting the program requirements for the stage size should you move that and to gain that square footage.
It reduces the effective size of the stage a little bit.
And the seating capacity.
Correct.
Inside the cafeteria.
Not the seating capacity. The seating capacity would be reduced by pushing the cooking area down further. That would be a reduction of floor area, which you would take a hit on the capacity of the seating for the auditorium and the cafeteria.
Uh-huh. And sorry, go ahead.
It's hard with the table this way to know that. Sorry. So my understanding that if you went with the design that is the reduced size, that we wouldn't necessarily meet the program need of having 2 classes in the cafeteria at the same time eating lunch, that reducing the space reduces the students to under 280. Is that correct?
It depends what your class sizes are. So I know that the class sizes now can be up to 140. So if you have 2 classes that are at 140, you're not going to be able to accommodate those full classes. If you have 2 classes that are at 110, you will be able to. So it really depends on the actual class size, which I know varies between grade levels.
Thank you.
And when you talked about the stairwell area and having to demolish that should you eventually need to add more classrooms, is that a big expense to demolish a stairwell and reposition it?
It's excavation, it's building enclosure, it's heating, it's windows, so it is not an inexpensive piece of construction.
Mm-hmm.
And with the bond, with the drawing from the bond, it would have to be demolished as well. But we were asked specifically to accommodate for another grouping of classrooms, top and bottom.
Right.
I just had one question. I know that there's been talk, and I think it was in the Enterprise article, about 2 designs that were delivered. But, you know, I don't remember seeing 2 designs, and I remember seeing this, and this is some cuts. I think it was also referenced that there was a 12,500 square foot design delivered from PVBW, but that was never, we never saw a 12,500 square foot design from you, did we?
So the reduced area plan that we presented before was an attempt to bring the design closer back to that 12,500 number.
13.2, right?
Right. So we're still, even with these cuts, we're still over by a little more than 700 square feet. And as Ray pointed out before, a large chunk of that area is the below grade space, which is a storage space, so essentially would be built up as cheap space right now. The actual reduction in square footage from the first floor program areas is only about 620 square feet.
Do you guys feel you delivered 2 designs to us that met program?
No. I think one meets the program as we currently understand the program. The other one does not. The other one would require some compromise in classroom size and in capacity of in the auditorium configuration and in the cafeteria configuration, and storage and mechanical spaces, et cetera. So it does not meet the program as we understand the program that we reviewed with you just a few minutes ago, the spreadsheet.
Okay. Thank you. Do any other board members have questions?
I'm trying to articulate my question. There's a lot of, just between Plan 1 and Plan 2, larger plan, smaller plan, there's a fair bit of squishing, obviously. Reducing the footprint of the cafeteria. But we keep making reference to the significant change is this first floor level that would be backfilled in versus built out as you.
The lower level,
Yeah.
right.
So let's stay on that specific point. How much money is actually saved there? Right? Like we're dealing with unfinished space and a mechanical and plumbing room versus it's not zero cost to get backfill and backfill.
It's not zero cost. You're building, what you are building, whether you take that space or not.
Yeah.
You're building concrete walls that go down to footings.
Yes.
So you're building the walls, you're building the surrounding walls
Yes.
and the ceiling
Yes.
by virtue of building either design.
Yes.
The additional cost would be in a slab, putting a slab down below, possibly some more excavation. We don't know whether that involves rock or not. There is some rock in that area. So it's not zero cost. I would be putting my foot in my mouth to give you a number on it now. But you're building a lot of it by virtue of building the building.
Well, I guess that's what I appreciate. I appreciate that you're doing the walls and the ceiling.
Right.
And that.
I mean, imagine you could put the building on stilts back there, but but it would be kind of an absurd thing to do and probably wouldn't save much money in any event.
And I think part of the mandate was to create as much new space as we could for classrooms, right? And to ready for a possible future addition should it be needed, to make that as easy as possible. Right? So you're saying that there's one design that really does that.
Right. That space could double as educational space down the road. And it would also link nicely to a future addition of adding additional classrooms top and bottom. That was also a programmatic request, not specific to the current design, but future design.
I'm sorry, guys, I have one more question. I know someone mentioned solar panels on the roof. Was that ever a possibility, or?
Of what?
Solar panels on.
We had a debate about that internally, about what the right thing to do was, and the whole school is flat. The roof of the whole school is flat, so there's incredible opportunity to put panels elsewhere on the building. The design approach that we took was try to respect the existing architecture of the school and to slope the roof in a way to mediate between the large volume and the high volume. You have to have a high volume for the auditorium function, and we felt that by stepping it down, breaking the mass up a little bit, it's not that complicated, but breaking it a little bit is a more appropriate way to respect the architecture of the school.
And solar panels could go on the other flat areas in the future, should they want.
Rena pushed for it the other way. I overruled her. I know that we were not gonna, we felt that this is a very prominent corner of the building. This is what you see coming in. You see this coming up from the tennis courts, and you see it coming in. It's really prominent, and it has to be, you have to mediate the scale. Otherwise, it's very abrupt and very, it simply becomes a box, and an unarticulated box doesn't send the right message. And again, the mechanical systems are identical. They are roof-mounted air handlers with supplemental mechanical spaces below that have to be inside, boilers, plumbing things, and switch gear, electrical switch gear.
And Maureen, you may be able to answer this better, but and if we have to wait till Triton comes back, I understand. But the idea of cost per square foot at somewhere around $490 right now, and, Ray and Rita, you may know this as well. And the fact that that is applied to every square foot, including essentially this base square foot that is not going to be fitted out at all at almost, well, it's 792, it says here, square feet. I mean, is that one of the things I think, as I was personally thinking through my own point of view on this, was that at the schematic pricing point, there was a very high, very conservative number put in because it just wasn't sure what we were going to get. But it seems, because what we needed, and that was just a blanket number. And one of the conversations that I think the board had early on was this idea that some of these numbers likely will come down because there's been contingency. But if you could just, I don't know if anyone here's got a perspective on that, but it seems like to say that there's this really almost well outfitted, sophisticated, with the roof, the panels for the audio panels, acoustic panels, to say that that's the same dollar per square foot as the $490, it just seems.
Well, I think that was when they presented and shaded some of those areas. I think that's what Triton was saying, that it's not as though if you scale back 100 square feet, you're going to save 100 times 490.
That's the issue I'm having.
Excuse me?
That's exactly the issue I'm having.
And I think what's hard is, right, we're trying to compare what is like pre-bond, a number that is kind of an all baked in number, and obviously within that there could be parts of the building that could be 600 square feet, $600 per square foot in that room, where in others' room it could be significantly less. So I think that's where the night that Ray and Raina, and I think in trying to give some comparison to like where it was pre-bond, I think some of it is in the square footage, some of it I think Triton tried to, and we've tried to articulate that some of it is just in price escalation. And I think they spoke to specifically the price of steel going up about 25% because of tariffs and things. I mean, I think optimistically we're hoping, as we hear things in the news, that some of those prices that reflected that escalation of those tariffs will in fact come down. You know, that's the hope. I can tell you that, you know, when they come back at their next pricing juncture, in between each time, there has been efforts to bring down the price, and there are things that as they become more going through them, and how even the secret tonight, it actually, I mean, Joe can speak to it, it really only is 10 trees they need to remove. It wasn't 30. So there are things as we go through and we get more detail that some of those things are reducing the price. But back to your point about the square footage, I think that even in the note there, at least Triton that evening said, even if you were to eliminate the lower level or some of that, it wasn't going to get you back to that base number. It wasn't going to, you know, and that would have required them to do a much like more detailed, you know, look at that. So I think in trying to, you know, factor that in, like, would that only save 400? I don't know, like, we didn't know exactly the number. So I think a lot of it, at least it appeared that a lot of it was due to pricing, and then there was a component on the square footage. But being some of the additional square footage isn't finished space, it's hard to know like what reducing that would have really saved. I think that was the issue that, you know, when you look at the two different numbers and where we are today versus pre-bond. But I would say that, not to say everyone's doing the same work, but there has been, at least in the last 3 or 4 months, people opening bids that are quite high in the area. And we have real-time pricing where some of them were relying on like a year and a half ago pricing. So that's not to say when we go to bid, I think the thing is right now we're getting pricing reflecting some of those escalations. Right. And we didn't have that. I mean, that wasn't the case earlier.
When do we get the next round of estimate?
Well, I think the idea is they're going to come in January. I think there's some things they're working out right now. There were, again, as you go through them, you'll see that there's things that they add in or they're making assumptions, and that requires a decent amount of time to go back through and tighten up to ensure that we are on budget and things are being identified that would be, you know, areas that we can reduce costs in that work. And again, that we may not see if in fact that deal goes through. I don't know how long it'll take the construction, you know, to react to those pricing changes. I mean, the hope would be that, you know, we'll start to see some of those coming down a bit. You know, any reduction in the escalation, even by 5%, would be significant on this type of project. So I think then, you know, Triton, the plan is to come back in January, and at that time too, I think they'll have some other pricing things and other work they're, you know, also working on some other price estimates to update you with, and, you know, so you have a better picture of all the work, which I think is important.
You know, and I feel it's important to share just a personal perspective right now because, you know, it's obviously hard when you're dealing with so many variables and you're trying to make what amounts to a very difficult decision. I think, as other people have mentioned, you're not dealing with, you know, just your own pocketbook or you and your family. You're dealing with public money. And I think it's important that the town knows and the public knows the struggle that we have as board members in making these decisions. You know, we made a tough decision in the February timeframe to go forward with an RFP, and we did that knowing that we were going to really time box ourselves in this process. And I think where we've ended up now is a place where, in a perfect world, we would wait until we had that tighter assessment of actual cost, because there's a world in which, and we don't know if we're going to hit it, and that's the issue right now. There's a world in which we get these estimates back, and we're able to shave off enough that we only need to seek 200, 300, 400, I don't know what number. I don't want to put a number out there and be pegged because I have no idea, but it could be less. You know, we don't know. And I think that I would love to do that. I would love to wait until we said, okay, that's the number, what do you want to do? And I feel sometimes somewhat frustrated because what we're actually asking the public for is the ability to spend if we need it, and we don't know what we need, and we're doing the kind of the best we can with those variables. And I'll just share it, it's frustrating to me. It's very challenging. And so I only bring that up to say that, a lot of times I think people get to see the decisions that fall out the bottom, and you get to see what we can talk about in a board meeting, but I share that to say that it's been personally challenging to figure out what to do in this situation. And I've really appreciated the professionals that we've had, from the people in district to PBBW, to H2M, to Triton, and I know that you guys have a variety of meetings that obviously people on the board can't make because you're meeting for many-hour meetings. There's a lot of variables, it's uncomfortable to ask for the ability to spend the money before you know you need it. And unfortunately, from a timing perspective, we're in that position because if we don't, we could end up losing a year, which just adds a whole bunch of other variables and costs. So it's kind of, I think the vote we're going to take tonight is, do we put the vote out? And the town may say, appreciate all your hard work, and not giving it to you. You don't get it, and figure out what to do. Gosh, I hope we have a little bit more clarity on the price, so that even though we will be going out for a vote at $1.3 million, we have maybe some degree of confidence that we're able to say, can't promise anything, but it doesn't look like we're going to need the 1.3, and we can share that. And maybe if it comes back in January, there's something we could share. I still don't know, but it does feel weird asking for permission to spend money that we don't quite sure what we need.
Well, as the attorney said, you're asking for permission if you need to take it out of there. It actually doesn't move physically out of the capital reserve fund, and if you only take out what you need to spend. I mean, I think right now the idea in the numbers that we provided early on, and looking at, I can tell you that number is not at that same number anymore. It is actually reduced, but again, until things are moving around, and I think it's better for the board to see even the other projects, as we've talked about, where we are seeing some other things that are coming in a bit lower, and kind of to see how that is part of our overall, how that money then within the bond proceeds can cover some of those escalated costs or additional costs at Hillside. So I think, to your point, the hope would be that we would need, the initial number, we would need every penny of it. I think the idea is that as we go forward and have more information and hopefully have some savings in other areas, and also see some reduction in those costs, that we won't in fact need the entire dollar amount. But you do have to, I think you don't want to go out multiple times, so the idea would be to go out with the max number we think we need.
All right, so I'd like to share my thinking around this. And I don't have any notes taken, so it won't be particularly eloquent. I'm going to try to touch on a number of different things here. I guess the first is one of, I don't take the vote lightly. I hate even authorizing spending money. We don't even know if we're going to be spending the money. But it's, as a steward of the public finances in this position, it weighs heavily on me, even the perception that the cost has increased without sufficient diligence on our part from the $18.3 million that was approved. It's point one. Point two, I suppose I'd like to applaud Maureen, who had the foresight to put together the capital reserve just a year ago in anticipation and it's a reflection of, I think, real budget discipline in the last year that this capital reserve even exists with the ability to access it. So that's another point that comes to mind. Point number 3 is one of, I think, the short shrift that was made to the degree to which the usage of the capital reserve is offset by state aid. And so you're really looking at getting 50% of that back. So I think while the narrative rapidly moves towards $1.3 million, monies that are drawn from the capital reserve are aidable, and I think is a very important point. And I think I'll leave it at that. Point number 4, I think that I would hate to be in this position, look back a decade from now. And you can see where my vote is going clearly, but I would hate to look back a decade from now and feel that I was a penny wise and a pound foolish. I think that we have gone through a process that was led by very well-informed and well-intentioned, community-based desire for a level of design and thought that are what connected the district to PBDW. And I think that they have operated, from everything that I have seen and been part of, at an absolute best efforts to create something that's very sensitive to our budget and our very real budget constraints, but also consistent with programming need that was not particularly well spelled out, and I'm probably being generous in that comment, in the first schematic. So I don't think that this design that we're being asked to vote on is arrived at lightly in any way. I think that largely covers the significant points that that strike me about this process. But by no means is this taken lightly, and that's it. Those are my thoughts. Oh, I'm sorry.
You're never sorry.
Well, just sorry, the final thing I wanted to say is, and the reality is, this is a democratic process, and to Doug's point, we'll bring this to the public in February, and the public can hopefully see this discussion, see the schematic work, reach out to us as a board with questions, and I'm sure there will be a back and forth, as I anticipate, and we'll let the democratic process work with a vote in February. That's truly it. Thank you.
So at the risk of being someone who suffers from bond PTSD, I want to thank both of you, Doug and Tim, because I think that your words very much spoke to what I've been thinking about and wrestling with. This feels like a very difficult position for us, and I think it's very easy for people to think that everything isn't being considered and that we're not. It's very hard to be in this position and have to take into account people who live in this community of all socioeconomics, people who want to stay in this community, who may not even have children in school anymore, or people who don't have children. And how do we do that and still try to meet the needs? I think in the process of going through this, there's something very pleasing that both of our architects happen to be from Hastings, because I feel like that also makes you sensitive to the needs of the community, or invested, I would say, not sensitive, but invested in the needs of the community. And I think back to the meetings that we had in the community center and how where we landed was very much a compromise from people who wanted us to have a much lower bond and people saying this should be a $25 million bond. There were many people pushing at that time for this to be a much, much bigger bond. And my exact thing that I actually said to Sylvia was, I feel like I don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish. I don't want to foolishly spend money or see that we're going to have some very contentious few months ahead of us. And I think that if the vote tonight goes to go forward, it's really incumbent upon us to do the best job that we can to really get the information out in terms of why this is the way we're going, and hopefully, again, people will, we have to do our job, and then it will be up to people in the community to make their decisions, and we'll have to do a lot of talking and a lot of very clear communicating, I think.
Good. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you to Ray and Lena for coming and presenting that detail. Again, that's up on board docs. I know that was hard to read here with the font. It was a little challenging, but that detail is up on board docs as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much for agreeing to come in tonight. I think for all of us, people out and people who will watch, it's very helpful to hear from you and not just us to try to interpret what your thinking was. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so next on the agenda is...
Can I just ask Maureen a question?
Sure.
Maureen, if we take money from the reserve, repair reserve and put it into capital reserve and it doesn't all get spent, can money go back to the repair reserve fund?
No, it would stay in the capital reserve.
Okay.
Which in some ways,
Same thing.
it's similar. It's a similar use. I mean, in some ways, I think the capital reserve gives you the flexibility. It's a little different because you have to get a public vote
What would
and
you
on
say
a...
to concerns that people have about our not having money in the repair reserve fund in the event that we have some huge repairs that we're not even thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that is always a concern, right? We always want to, consider all that. I don't think, to your points tonight, it's something to act as, we don't need it for anything. But I think in where we are today and the need to kind of address the current bond we're working in, that was why we talked about making that recommendation to do it. But I think we do, as with the facilities committee, and we started just very briefly looking at it as a process, we should be laying out multi-year plans. And the 5-year plan is a working guidance, a working document, and I think it is important to not forget things that are needs that exist and how we need to look at those and either look at our overall budget or look at priorities and build out a really comprehensive longer plan than 5 years, similar to financial. So I think that's part of the ongoing conversation. Unfortunately, this money, although it would also address some of those needs, we do have a need now, and it's not an easy one to say which one's more important, but I think this is more the immediate need. But we definitely have to, as we talk about our budget this year in particular and facilities and long-term planning, it's definitely part of the conversation and thinking about how that fits into our overall financial plans in the next few years, and how we, thinking about either being able to put money back into those reserves when money becomes available, similar to a few years back where we had many tax cert obligations, and the priority at that time was to, when there was excess funds available, to put it to the tax cert reserve. I think we would then also look to prioritize putting money back in when we have some savings, to put money back into the capital reserve fund, to address other things that may come up.
So the money that's returned from the state for the 42% in the capital reserves, that money that's returned also has to go back to the capital
Well,
reserve fund?
what the idea is that it doesn't have to. I mean, it could just come back to the general fund. It has to be appropriated there, but the idea in using it, and there is a reason to, and that's why I think it was going back to the planning of the 5 years facilities planning. I think for many years before, we hadn't issued bonds, and there is a reason to be more strategic in how we do our repairs, because we do capitalize on getting the aid back from the state. So whether that be from putting money back into the capital reserve strategically and thoughtfully, and then making plans to either, submit plans to the state in advance of those repairs being needed, so that we can continue to, gain some of that aid back from the state. Because unfortunately, sometimes there have been things, and there are times that, whether, I think Lisa mentioned, like doors, and there are reasons we've made decisions to go forward and do the work, there's an immediate need that exists. But I think in planning it and doing it so that either we do think about how we will put money back into that and also address some of those needs, but then submitting it to the state to, again, capitalize and getting funds back, which then will help us replenish it. But I think it's, again, tied to budget talks this year. I think it's facilities planning is key, and you have to have an informed understanding of what the facilities needs are as we're looking at our operational budget too, because although I would agree that, you do have to think about those things, you can't, act like they're not part of, our budget at all. So I think, not that we don't, I mean, that's constantly, like, there's always facilities money in there, and I think it's good for us to have just good comprehensive plans and just so we can respond to that, because it's a valid point, that we do. We're always going to have, on these type of buildings, they're older, there will always be a need to invest in them.
But when people are concerned about taxes, going to the tax base to say, oh my goodness, there's an emergency and we don't have money now in the repairs fund, would we then be able to say, well, we're getting the 42% back and we're going to allocate this money?
Well, I think we need to be very clear, and the board has to direct us, if that's, that's the direction we have to prioritize when we have monies that are either savings or come back to us in the way of aid, that money would have to be, earmarked and prioritized. You can't really earmark it, but then the understanding would be that this, specifically when you're building your budget, that there has to be a deliberate action to be replenishing those reserve funds. And that's going to come with a lot of discipline. That has to be, that's a real thing. If we're making that decision, that, requires us to be very thoughtful. And even as we think about doing things around the building, it has to be done in an extremely, these are our priorities. And, district-wide, and whether it be room utilization, how we spend money, anything that we touch in this building is going to have to fall into that priority list. There'll no longer be things that we would like to, it'll have to fall completely, be very well thought out and planned for. Where sometimes we do things that we're like, oh, this is nice, but it'll all be based on full priorities across the system.
So I want to make sure we continue to move along. Does anyone have a burning question or comment? I see the next thing is the construction update.
It's just like a timeline.
It seems pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, and I think this is what I think, obviously with Triton coming in, also beyond, I know we talk a lot about the Hillside Addition, is because it's a large component of the project, but just to kind of give you an update on where the other projects stand, the other submittal is, we already have the paperwork, and it's just awaiting a signature. It's going up this week to the state for the hillside roof, windows, flooring, and masonry work that is going to be done this upcoming summer. So you can kind of just see on this bullet, what the submittal, when we anticipate state aid approval, and when we look to do the competitive bidding and contract award and project start. And again, these dates, they were really working toward, because, getting in and getting those bids out earlier will, it's beneficial. It's better. We want to bid it well in advance of the summer, so we hope to get, good pricing on those items. And again, this, as we get things developed and submitted to the state and are able to bid on it, then that'll also help you in looking at where are we in our total bond spending. And I think that's really critical, because I think that also is a part of the conversation when we think about the overall funds available. The Hillside Addition if in fact we are able to move forward, the idea would be then to submit sometime in late March with New York State at approval in June, with a competitive bidding and contract award in July, and a project start date of August 2020 with a substantial completion of August 2021. That would probably mean the building would open sometime in that fall, September, October. And again, these are kind of key dates, and this is where we're trying to stick to. Janine, can you just go to the next slide? Just 2 slides. Thank you. And then here, just on the Farragut project, so Farragut roof, boiler, masonry, parapets, and the Farragut elevator lift in this building are they're in the works. They're almost completed with the construction documents that will be submitted to SED January 2020, approval March 2020, bid April 2020, and the project start dates. You can see there the boiler and the elevator would begin a little bit earlier because they actually they'd be manufacturing the components of it, and they could do some preliminary work there, and that we're happy that both of those are on track and they're finishing up the work there. And again, they from some of the items in here and the pricing exercise that Triton has done thus far shows that these numbers are coming in below budget. So as we look at where are some of those other funds coming from, it's coming from things that were originally, thankfully, had a little bit more of a higher number, and now we're finding some of those items are coming in, less than, a little bit less. So we're picking up some savings across some of these items. The high school, middle school music suites, as well as the middle school auditorium. They will be coming back in January with some pricing on some preliminary thoughts there. And again, with they shared some of those ideas about making that a multi-level space and kind of being able to share out some numbers at that point. And again, this work, as you can see here, is scheduled to be submitted in October 2020. And actually, they believe they can get into the middle school auditorium even maybe before that April 21 date, depending, because they can do a lot of that work actually when the building's in session. So that would be the plan. There are a second shift. And these are also timed around because the mobilization of those 2 items with some of the other infrastructure work being done at the Farragut would be difficult to work on the Farragut roof and the middle school auditorium at the same time. And also they're designing the work, so it's taking some time to get both done. So that's the updates there, and they'll share some of that in their January meeting with you as well, and pricing.
Thank you, Maureen.
Welcome.
Okay, so I want to move on here to the business items. We'll go through all 4 of these resolutions separately. So 6A is the resolution to approve the full sum of the funds held in the repair reserve to the roll call vote. Okay. So again, first one, 6A, resolution to appropriate the full sum of the funds held in the repair reserve to the capital reserve fund. Do I have a motion for this item, to vote on this item?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Tim and Jeremy.
Okay, so let's do a roll call vote. Do you want to call it out, Maureen, or Janine, or do you want us just to go down the line?
Do you want to call it out? Hang on, this Tim and Jeremy. Aye. Jeremy? Aye or nay? We have to do a roll call vote.
Roll call vote.
Aye.
Yeah.
Okay. Allison?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye.
Lauren?
Aye.
Tim?
Aye.
Jody?
Aye.
And Sylvia?
Aye.
Okay.
Second, SECRA amended negative declaration. Do you have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
Second? Okay.
Who were the move?
Allison and Sylvia.
Allison and Sylvia? I just wanted to say that that secret does include that removal of the trees that we now, as of last week, deem that are not necessary. And even speaking to the lawyer, they're like, you can change it, but I just felt like that would have been the highest number. And although we're going to issue the permit for the Army Corps of Engineers, in now finding out that some of those things that they initially had considered are not needed, there's like a chance that we wouldn't even need that permit, but I think the wisdom was to issue it in the event that if something were to spark it, so we're going with that. But there's not going to be need to put a crane behind that building, which changes some of that declaration, which included not being clear on if there would need a crane. It was less to do with the building and more to do with the mobilization of construction.
Okay.
This does not need a roll call vote.
Sorry.
Well, this does not need a roll call vote. Okay.
This is B, secret, the amended
6B.
negative declaration we're on right now.
Did we do the motion?
We did.
We did Allison and
Okay.
Sylvia?
No, but we didn't actually vote on 6B. though.
Right, we didn't vote on that.
So all in favor? Does C or D, do they need roll call votes or no?
The secret resolution itself needs a roll call vote.
Okay.
A motion and a roll call vote.
6C, seeker resolution. Are there any further questions on this before we vote? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the seeker resolution?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
This is a roll call.
Oh, this one's the
on
roll
the
call. Right,
resolution.
okay.
All right, Jeremy.
Jeremy?
I have Doug.
Allison's out. Aye. Doug?
Lauren. Aye. Tim.
Aye.
Jody.
Aye.
And Sylvia.
Aye.
Okay.
And the resolution calling a special district meeting to be held on February 6, 2020.
This will need a roll call vote also.
Okay. Do I have a motion for this vote? And second?
Second.
Okay.
Okay, so Jeremy.
Aye.
Doug.
Aye.
Lauren.
Aye.
Tim.
Aye.
Jody.
Aye.
Sylvia.
Aye.
Allison.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, business items. We've got 23 items here. Actually, I think it would be helpful, Lisa raised a point before, it would be helpful to just get some clarity on Elliot's contract. It seems to me like that's not something that had to be put up for RFP because it's within our policy. So what's the...
Our policy stipulates that if we engage with our BOCES or any BOCES, the amount that we are required to issue an RFP for would be $25,000. So Mr. Marenbloom's proposal fell underneath the $25,000 threshold. However, we felt that, just in the event that we needed more of his time, we wanted to make sure that we covered ourselves by issuing the RFP.
So that would be essentially an RFP for him or others.
Him or others.
And we get these, and if we need to use more of his time, we go through that process.
We would, and just to, to revisit the initial proposal for the service, we had already engaged with a scheduler last year, so prior to my arrival and Ms. Szymanski's arrival, the building principals had already requested the services of a master scheduler, so this is not a new item for the district. We're just putting into motion the use of this person in light of data that that was reviewed, that Ms. Szymanski spent quite a bit of her time looking at our ESSA data that really helps us to better pinpoint areas that we need to actually look at that have not previously been reviewed.
So I do it to the point that Lisa raised earlier. Are we able to vote on this while the RFP is still outstanding legally? We need to wait till the RFP closes.
No, you have a proposal from the scheduler that is underneath the $25,000 threshold, which is your board policy. So you can vote on you can approve the contract because it does fall within the board policy. as I mentioned earlier, the reason why we issued the RFP is in the event we need more of the scheduler's time or the need for other time from someone else that the building leaders would like to work with. So it's just a provision for us in the event there is a need.
Does anyone have any questions on items 1 through 23 besides those?
While Jody's waiting on her question, I just want to thank Joel Dean for his contribution that we've received tonight on the, sometimes with donations, we try to highlight them within the business section, so.
I do have a question about the Marin Bloom contract. I guess it just, maybe it's just an eyesore, but it seems that $3,200 a day to me seems very high for consulting, particularly in the realm of public education. I don't know, Valerie, if you have thoughts about that. Is that par for the course?
Actually, Ms. Szymanski, what was the cost of the other scheduler that I guess this board had already approved last year? Because there was a consideration for another master scheduler. Do you recall that amount?
I do actually have something from BOCES that is showing, and this is something that was a request for the following services with Michael Reddick, which was 2 days, and this would be for total fee consulting services is $7,700 for 2 days. So it's comparable.
And in addition, what Mr. Marenblum is doing is very specific, so I'm not sure what the request was for the previous scheduler, but he will be spending his first 3 days working with the middle school team. The first day, really listening to the middle school team describe some of the areas of challenge for them in their block schedule, which is also a letter day rotation schedule. They will also describe to him perhaps some of the things that they would like to do, and then some of the things that are constraints because they are part of a contract or contracts. The next day that he's in the middle school, he will be helping the middle school to build sort of a master schedule in sort of a sandbox so that they get an opportunity to put into place some of the goals that they have with regards to how they already know some of the areas that are constraints, such as certain children not being able to take world language class until they're in another grade level, or students who have to make choices between a mandated service or a course that they have a particular interest in taking, or students who may not, be able to, take rigorous courses because under ESSA, that's a major requirement to ensure that there are no barriers that would impede children from being able to take more rigorous courses. So that's a major, major area that we want to make sure that we're not in violation of. And that's for any student, but it's more challenging with students with mandated services. So if a schedule is not set up for children to have multiple opportunities, we really do need to make sure that we look at that. And as I said, the principals have asked for the service in the past. And on the third day, he's actually going to spend some time, working through that schedule, seeing if there are any conflicts while he's here. So that's 3 days of intensive work in terms of looking at the master schedule, which, as I said earlier, had already been requested last year. The second day, He'll spend some time at the high school, and I believe that Lou and Melissa are also involved with the earlier days that Mr. Bloom is here, because the two schedules, I mean, the high school and the middle school do share staff, and that's often a challenge. So they have a vested interest in making sure that they're present to hear what impact any changes may have on them. But that still doesn't preclude the middle school from really looking closely at what interferes with the middle school students from having access to certain courses. He will then go over to Hillside, where he'll spend 3 days as well, conducting similar analysis on the schedule. Again, looking at some of the ideas that both Amy and John have with regard to the schedule, sort of what they absolutely would want to see, and then looking at some of the barriers or some of the things that may be contractual, and then again, some of those challenges that have really been difficult for them over time. So we feel that having that service available, especially since we want to make sure that we're not ignoring some signs that we really need to make sure that all of our children have access to courses and pathways that are a fundamental principle under ESSA.
So just so I'm clear on that, you said 3 days, and then you said when he goes to Hillside, it's another 3 days. So is the idea that we're going to use this contract, use him for one, and then have him come back? The plan is to have him come back?
Well, he's here in the month of January. The first 3 days, I believe,
This is for 6, right?
6 days. So he's here to be he's here initially to be with starting with the middle school, and then one of those days, I mean, if it's not all the days or the full day, he'll be able to spend some time in the high school, and then the other days will be at Hillside.
So what I'm buying here is one package for him to deliver a set of services right now.
Absolutely, and again, services that the principals have already requested last year.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about any other items? Would everyone feel comfortable taking 1 through 23 as a consent agenda, or does anyone want me to pull anything out? Okay, do I have a motion to approve items 1 through 23 with the business items 6E?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? Placement for CSE and CPSC. Does anybody have any questions there? Do I have a motion to approve these placements?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, Terry's tenure. So personnel 7B through E. Does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to share?
May I speak to one of the items, which is has to do with our, up until this point, interim Director of Health, Physical Education, and Athletics. So Mr. Merchant over here has performed in the role of interim for a couple of years, 2 years. And in my opinion, the district has been very fortunate to have him serve in that role. And since he's enjoyed that role thoroughly, he's now ready to relinquish his probationary, his position as a teacher of health and physical education, so that he can become the director on a probationary track of health, physical education, and athletics. And I just want to in the way of describing, for those of you who may not know him as well, Mr. Merchant's probationary period reflects credit earned from February 9th, 2019, when he was granted his administrative certification. So since August 31st, 2017, Mr. Merchant has successfully served in the role of interim Director of Health, physical education, and athletics. During his time in the position, he has dutifully performed essential leadership responsibilities, which include hiring, supervising, and evaluating the physical education, health, and coaching staff. Mr. Merchant is tasked with ensuring that the physical education and health curriculum not only fulfills the requirements prescribed by New York State, but he also understands the importance of having students learn how to make good decisions that extend beyond their time in health, physical education, and athletics. Mr. Merchant values professional learning to support and sustain the expertise of talented educators and coaches. Whether organizing learning opportunities internally or encouraging outside participation in conferences, Mr. Merchant's advocacy for continued learning is commendable and will help sustain his vision for the department. Among Mr. Merchant's other responsibilities, he reviews and selects materials for the health education curriculum. He makes presentations to the Board of Education, which you've seen on a number of times, on various topics related to his department. He collaborates with other athletic directors in the region to support his programs. He maintains ongoing open dialogue with parents and members of the community. He follows and fulfills all guidelines associated with Section 1 rules and regulations, and he manages a budget inclusive of personnel, equipment, and supplies. Mr. Merchant takes pride in maintaining a strong athletic program through his practice of holding student athletes to a high standard of conduct and behavior exercise on and off the field. This belief is also carried over to the stands during games, which can be a little dangerous, but he handles it very well. Audience behavior is modeled in front of students. Mr. Merchant expects those in the stands, whether at home or away, to be mindful of what they do or say. His expectations are captured in his motto, which he repeats when he sees certain behaviors emerge. Cheer for, but not against. Mr. Merchant is an extraordinary role model for students and staff because of his strong work ethic, high degree of integrity, and moral courage. He is even-tempered, reflective, thoughtful, and committed to being the best leader possible. And for these reasons, he is well suited to become the Hastings Director of Health, Physical Education, and Athletics.
Okay, that was great. We accept your resignation. No, we haven't done that yet, but we will. And your appointment. We will vote on that. Before we do that, does anyone have anything further that they'd like to comment on or questions about? So for personnel items 7, B through E, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, congrats, Jesse. Okay, approval of minutes, 8A. Does anyone have any questions about the minutes? Why am I showing up here? I don't have the minutes on this one now. Do you guys have it? Yeah, they're not. Ginny, can we push that off till the next meeting?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, committee reports. Policy committee?
The policy committee met on November 26th. We reviewed or had ongoing discussions of a number of policies, primarily which were NYSBA recommended or required. And tonight there are 3 pieces of policy that have been reviewed and revised, and one that's new to our district that are there for our first read. We're not having our policy meeting this month, but we will meet again in January.
Okay.
Which would have been canceled anyway.
Oh yeah, that's true with the delay. Tomorrow would have been canceled anyway.
Right. Good preemptive cancel.
Yeah.
Okay, finance. Maureen, do you want to?
Yes, so I actually Unfortunately, I did put notes in both. I just try to summarize, and I'll expand on them a bit, but I just kind of highlighted it. I typed into the board docs, to speak to it really quickly on finance. The items that we went over at that particular meeting, I reported out on the healthcare and the retirement system costs, things that we've already been notified of increases, and how those will, what impact they'll have on the planning of next year's budget. We spoke about the tax cap and where we anticipate that number being for this year, as well as kind of reviewed what it has been the last few years, and just spoke about the long-term sustainability of trying to maintain a budget where your expenditures are outpacing the ability to, the tax cap rate that we're locked into. We also went over, we started to look at our updated 5-year plan. And again, this was tied to the discussion around the tax cap and just, thinking about going into the budget season and laying out our priorities, and the Finance Committee kind of giving us the charge to look to stay at that, with the hopes that the tax cap number, once we receive it, that we'll be planning on, trying to not exceed that dollar amount. So that was it on the finance. And facilities, the majority, and again, the notes aren't here, so I'll have to go, I don't know why that happened, but we again started to speak about that 5-year building conditions survey, which is a tool that you use, and it gives you an idea similar to the 5-year financial plan of things to be thinking about, and items within the facilities and the priority of doing some of that work. So that we started to kind of talk about that. That'll be something that we'll also review with our architects and be, trying to reprioritize. And I think actually more than a 5-year plan is appropriate, because 5 years come pretty quickly, but we'll be talking about that as it relates to the budget this year and prioritizing some work that we think needs to be accomplished in the 2021 school year. We also just spoke about, I reported out on the proposal of the village and the committee that I sit on about creating a safe drop-off zone at the school building. There was a public hearing this week to see if the village may be considering turning School Street into a no parking street with a drop-off zone and changing, streets to one-way. So that obviously has an impact around our own facilities and how we think about our, entrance ways and things at the school, and that's connected to the facilities committee. We also just spoke about the plantings and some of the ongoing landscaping plans at Burke, and we spoke about how some of the money has, the majority of money that we have right now and the work we've done has been gifted to us by a local resident who, after we completed the work at the Burke, was interested in helping or partnering with the school to kind of re-landscape it. And we spoke about the cost in doing so, and there were some concerns, and understandably, because in looking at the invoice, sometimes it seems a little bit high, but we kind of went back over that. We do pay prevailing wage, and why the decision was made in this particular landscape to use a professional service, because we wanted to be thoughtful also about the placements and the type of trees we were planting. And I think that was the majority of things we covered at the facilities meeting.
Okay, thank you. Obviously more to come on both those topics, and
Yep.
finance will be ramping up. And, having some conversations in the coming weeks,
Mhm. Yep.
coming months about where
Absolutely.
do we kind of, I think, one of the important things about finance is it's numbers conversation, but it's a philosophical conversation as well, and there's probably some philosophical
Mhm.
conversations that we have to have. Okay. Policies, new business.
So under the new business, there are 3 pieces of policy that the policy committee worked on collectively to prepare. One, we had seen as a board, which is the first one, the 4321.4 and its regulation, which was presented by Ms. Sullivan and Mr. Stewart, which regards independent educational evaluation and the reimbursement for them. So there's content in that that's redlined, so you can look through that and see what we've added. The next one is regarding child abuse in an educational setting, and New York State has new guidelines which more specifically outline who are required reporters, which is different than mandated reporters, but it's about required reporters who are aware of an abusive situation within a school. So it's not mandated reporters knowing of a situation outside of a school setting, but inside of the school setting, and they've expanded who those required reporters are and what the different roles are, and you can see those redlined in the policy that you have before you. Yeah. Oh. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't notice that. And the last is a required piece of policy from New York State, which is new for all districts, which is an opportunity for high school students who are 16 to pre-register to vote and having the school setting to provide that material for them. So those are the pieces of policy that are there for a first read.
Excuse me, we actually need a motion on the one for students to vote tonight, because it has to take effect at the beginning of January.
Are we able to do that if it's only
You can
first
have
read?
a first read and motion to approve it
You can?
in one board meeting.
Okay, that's 5605. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve changes to policy 5605? A second? All in favor? Okay. The HHS Feminism Club, is that something we have to vote on, or this is informational?
This is our proposal for an additional sub-account.
Sub-account, right, okay.
For that club, so.
Okay. Looks like a great club that's already been operating for several years, so. Do I have a motion to approve the sub-account for the HHS Feminism Club?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Second public comment. Anyone? Anyone?
Want to say that into the mic?
We even lost Rob up there. Man, I thought he was going to make it. Okay, board comments. All right. With that, let me make sure, I think we're at meeting adjourned, aren't we?
Yes. We just say happy holidays and
Oh, yeah. As our last board meeting, I'd like to wish all of you a happy holiday. Happy New Year's, whatever holiday you celebrate. We try to celebrate as many as we can in our house. And to everyone in the public who's at home watching, happy holidays. And with that, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
A second? All in favor? Okay.